Picture a stone bench, cold, worn smooth by centuries of use, carved with a row of holes spaced about 18 inches apart. Now put that bench inside a room about the size of a school classroom, with running water beneath it and a bucket nearby containing a sponge on a stick. Add 10 or 12 other people sitting on the same bench, some of them talking, some of them reading, one of them eating a small pastry he bought on the walk over. Now understand that the sponge in the bucket is shared between all of you, between all of them, between everyone who uses this room, every day from dawn to dusk. The bucket holds salt water. You rinse the sponge. You pass it on. You sit on the stone bench with its row of holes and conduct whatever business you came here to conduct, and you do it in the company of strangers with the same matter-of-fact ease you might bring to buying bread or stopping to look at a vendor's wares. This is the public latrina of Rome, year 72 of the Common Era, and the sponge on the stick, its technical name is the xylospongium, a word that will not help you feel better about it, is the most sophisticated personal hygiene implement available to the majority of the population of the largest city on earth. Now fill that picture with the rest of Rome. 1 million people. The smell of 1 million people, which is not a smell you have any good modern reference for. Add a river that floods twice a year and occasionally sends everything the city has deposited underground back up through the streets. Add apartment buildings 6 stories tall with no plumbing connections, where people carry chamber pots down flights of stairs every morning and empty them into collection barrels that are then used by professional clothes washers who have discovered, over centuries of practical experimentation, that the chemical properties of aged human urine are exceptionally good at loosening dirt from wool. Add the fact that someone collects those barrels and taxes them. The Emperor Vespasian introduced this tax. His son complained it was undignified. Vespasian held up a coin and asked if it smelled. The coin didn't smell. The tax stayed. Pecunia non olet. Money has no smell. This phrase has been in continuous use ever since. That's Rome. A city of extraordinary engineering, aqueducts, sewers, heated baths, and extraordinary daily improvisation. A place where you could visit a latrina that flushed with water from the same aqueduct that supplied the city's fountains in the morning, and walk 3 streets over to find someone emptying their chamber pot directly into the gutter in the afternoon. A city where the gap between brilliant infrastructure and daily reality was exactly the width of a social class, exactly the distance between the hill neighbourhoods where the rich lived and the valley neighbourhoods where everyone else did. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists looking at temples and forums, not as historians noting dates and dynasties. We're living it. One day, one person, everything they would have seen, smelled, heard, and managed. I make these history stories, and I'll be honest with you, this particular episode came about because I spent an afternoon reading about Roman sanitation and then couldn't unsee what I'd read. If you've ever wondered what a civilization that built the Colosseum and the Pantheon and 14 aqueducts, 14, what that civilization used before toilet paper, the answer is technically impressive and also deeply, deeply something you're going to have to sit with. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, half a second, maybe less. The darkness is total. No crack of light anywhere, no lamp left burning, nothing. And for that half second, you've forgotten. The body forgets before the mind does. You could be anywhere in that half second. Back in Puteoli, the fishing town on the Bay of Naples where you grew up, in the bed you shared with your brother, with the smell of the sea coming through the wall, If you pressed your ear to the plaster, then it hits you. The smell. It is not one smell. This is important. In 9 months in this city, you've learned that the smell of Rome is never one thing. It's a geological formation of odours, layered and stratified, each layer pressing down on the ones below it. And if you can learn to read it, if you can train yourself to distinguish its components, the way a physician distinguishes symptoms, you can understand quite a lot about where you are in this city and what condition it's in, and what happened last night while you were sleeping. First layer, the building itself. The insula you live in is 6 stories of timber and brick and Roman concrete, 40 years old, occupied continuously since the day it was finished. It has its own smell, this building, plaster dust and old straw, and the damp that comes from people living in close proximity with no system for moving moisture out. A smell that has been accumulating since before you were born and that will continue accumulating long after you leave. It's not a bad smell exactly. It's just the smell of people existing in the same space over time. Second layer, the people in this room. You sleep on a straw mattress with your 2 roommates, Titus on your left and Marcus on your right. Titus works at a dye shop near the river and has worked there for 3 years, long enough that his skin has taken on a faint permanent staining from the madder root they process. A dusty orange red under the fingernails and in the creases of his knuckles no matter how thoroughly he scrubs. He smells of work. He always smells of work, even when he's slept and washed, because the dye has gotten into something deeper than his skin. Marcus arrived from Capua 4 months ago, which means he arrived 3 months after you did, and you are, in terms of city experience, technically his senior, which still feels slightly improbable. He smells of the barley porridge the woman downstairs sells every evening for a semiter bowl, and of the slightly sour undertone of someone who is still not sleeping quite right in a new city, whose body hasn't adjusted to the ambient sounds and the different quality of air and the specific weight of 1 million people living close. Third layer, the chamber pot. It's in the corner. You don't need to look at it. After 9 months, you can gauge its condition from across the room without looking, which is both a useful skill and a moderately alarming piece of evidence about how much your relationship to certain categories of sensory information has changed since you arrived here. It's your turn to empty it this morning. You work out these rotations informally, tracking them in your head, because no one has ever said a word about it, but everyone knows whose turn it is, and everyone knows what happens to the social arrangement in the room if someone tries to dodge their turn, which is that it becomes unpleasant in a way that 3 people sharing a mattress cannot afford. Fourth layer, and this one you save for last because it requires the most attention, the smell from outside. From the street 6 stories below, coming up through the wooden floor and the gaps in the shutters and the crack under the door, with the patient persistence of all things that have nowhere else to go. If you've ever been near a large river in summer, and also near a very large number of cooking fires, and also near a livestock market, and also near the kind of commercial laundry operation that does its work with materials that make your eyes water just walking past, if you've ever been near all of these things simultaneously, you have perhaps a fraction of an approximation of what the morning air in the Asia.A district smells like. The fuller's workshop 3 doors down, the food vendor who sets up his brazier in the alley before dawn, the horses and mules from the overnight deliveries, Rome bans wheeled traffic during daylight hours, so everything moves at night, and what everything leaves behind moves into the morning air. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer that runs beneath these streets, breathing upward through the grating near the corner. Welcome to Rome, year 72 of the Common Era, the city that built an aqueduct system that delivered clean water to its fountains from mountain springs 40 miles away, and that also, in the alley outside your window, has what might generously be described as a complex relationship with this same water once it's passed through the city's processes. Your name is Lucius Anicius Rufus. It is a reasonably dignified name for the son of a freedman from a fishing town, and you've been told by Gaius, your master, the physician on whose behalf you are here, that in Rome a name like that carries just enough weight to open certain doors without carrying so much weight that people resent you for it. Your grandfather was a slave. Your father was freed when you were 3 years old and set up as a small fish merchant in Puteoli with the help of his former master's connections, and from a small fish merchant's income your father raised 4 children to adulthood and eventually scraped together enough goodwill and letters of introduction to send the most promising of them, that being you, to Rome to apprentice under a physician named Gaius Petronius Medicus, who specializes in something he calls the medicine of the city, which means he doesn't just treat patients individually, but studies illness as a property of the places where people live. This sounded, when your father described it, like an unusual way to spend your working life. After 9 months, it sounds essential, obvious, so self-evidently correct that you have difficulty understanding why not every physician does it this way. But first, the chamber pot. You get up without waking Titus, who has developed the sleep of someone who has made peace with his circumstances, deep and reliable and uninterrupted by anything short of the building actually falling down. Marcus stirs but doesn't wake. He's getting better at this. Another few months and he'll sleep through anything too. The floor is cold, November cold, the kind of cold that comes up through wooden boards, regardless of what you've spread over them, the kind that suggests the planks are not as thick as they should be, but are as thick as the landlord was willing to pay for. You find your feet and your balance in the chamber pot by the familiar geometry of a room you've navigated in the dark enough times that your body knows where everything is. The pot is heavy. This is always the first thing. How heavy it gets in one night with 3 people using it. You lift it carefully, holding it level, and you move to the door, and through the door and into the hallway. The hallway smells of the building concentrated. No windows here, no draught. Just the accumulated breath and proximity of everyone who lives on this floor, and the floors above and below. It's not a good smell, but it's a familiar one, and familiar has its own kind of comfort. The stairs are steep and worn smooth. You count them without thinking, 32 steps from the 6th floor to the ground, and you know by feeling which ones have the slight depression in the centre where the wear is deepest, which one on the 3rd floor landing has a loose board that will clatter if you put your weight in the wrong place, which step near the bottom has a splinter on the right side that has caught the edge of your foot 3 times and which you now avoid with the practiced unconsciousness of someone who has learned 1,000 small lessons about this building's particular character. You pass through the building floor by floor, the nut sellers on the 5th floor, the woman who does spinning work on the 4th, and her 2 children, and the smell of raw wool and something underneath it that you've learned not to examine, the fuller's overflow sleeping space on the 3rd, the merchant with the cedar chests on the 2nd, the tavern keeper on the ground floor, each floor its own climate, its own specific compound of smells. You've thought about this, about how a building is a vertical cross-section of the city, the poorest at the top, climbing 6 floors to save money and carrying the consequences of that economy up with them every day. the prosperous at the bottom, closer to the street and the commerce and the water and all the things that money buys access to. The alley is grey. The sky above the narrow gap between buildings is the colour of unpainted plaster, the colour Rome turns before the sun gets high enough to clear the building edges and reach the streets below. In the Subura, the sun sometimes doesn't reach the street level until mid-morning. The buildings are tall and close, and they make their own shadow cities underneath themselves. The collection barrel is at the alley's end, terracotta, half buried, its lid heavy and warped from use. You lift it. You pour. You don't think about what you're pouring or into what or why. You have reached a functional stoicism about this aspect of your morning, which is that the action is necessary, and necessary actions deserve to be executed efficiently and then left behind. You rinse the pot. There's a bucket of water kept beside the barrel for this purpose, with a long-handled ladle. You've thought about whose job it is to maintain that bucket of water, and have never been able to determine whether it belongs to the building, the fuller who owns the collection barrel, or simply to the ambient cooperative spirit of people who share a resource and have learned to maintain it together without anyone ever explicitly deciding to. It just gets done. The bucket is always there, the water always in it. You carry the empty pot back upstairs. By the time you've done this, gotten dressed, wool tunic, sandals, the leather belt that has stretched slightly over 9 months to accommodate whatever incremental changes your body has made in response to Roman food and Roman work. By the time you've done all this, Titus is up and lacing his sandals with the automatic speed of someone whose hands know the task without requiring the brain's involvement. Late, he says. I'm not. You're always late. I'm always exactly on time. He makes a noise that is not agreement but is also not disagreement, which is the noise he makes about most things, and leaves. You sit for a moment on the edge of the mattress and do the thing you do every morning, which Gaius assigned to you in your first week, and which you have continued because it works. You breathe slowly through your nose, you sort through everything you're smelling, you identify each component, the building, the people, the street, the cloaca, the fuller, the cooking fires. You name them in sequence. It's practice. It grounds you, reminds you of what the day is going to require, and of what kind of world you're about to move through. A physician who cannot smell, Gaius told you, is like a river pilot who cannot read the current. The information is there. You just have to learn to read it. You read the morning's composition. You stand up. You go to work. The Argiletum, the street of booksellers, the street where Gaius has his practice, is about 20 minutes' walk from the insula in the Subura, and you know every foot of that walk now with the intimacy of someone who has made it twice a day for 9 months in every kind of weather and every kind of city mood. You know which section of the Vicus Patricii has the broken drain that floods after rain. You know which corner near the Forum of Augustus has the smell of the bakery that starts its fires before dawn, a smell so aggressively good that it has, in 9 months, never failed to make you slightly hungry regardless of how recently you ate. You know which alley cuts time off the walk if you're running late, and which one to avoid after the second hour of the night, because that's where a particular group of men with very specific ideas about unattended purses tends to gather. This morning you take the direct route. The streets are already in motion. Rome does not have a slow start, does not build gradually to its daily business. It arrives at full operating speed the moment the sun edges over the building tops, and by the time you're in the street, you're already negotiating for space with everyone else doing the same thing. A vegetable cart. 3 men arguing about something outside a closed shop door. their voices carrying the particular pitch of an argument that has been going on since yesterday and will probably continue until tomorrow. A woman walking with tremendous purpose, a large basket on her head, and an expression on her face that suggests moving out of her way is the correct choice. Two slaves carrying something heavy between them on a pole, their steps synchronized with the mechanical precision of people who do this all day every day and have stopped being aware that they're doing it. A dog, possibly two dogs. It's hard to tell at this hour. The fuller's workshop near the collection barrel, Marcus Decianus's place, the one that uses the collection barrel you empty into every morning, is already running. You can hear it before you see it and smell it well before you hear it. The sound is rhythmic thumping, the stomping of feet in the large vats where the urine solution and the clothes are combined and worked, and the smell is what it is, which is something that improves significantly once the process is complete, and the clothes emerge clean and bright and smelling of nothing worse than the outdoor air they've been spread on to dry. The technology of Roman cleaning, the fuller's arte, is older than the Republic. The principle has been known for centuries, that aged urine contains compounds that break down the oils and fats that bind dirt to fabric. That human urine specifically, with its particular chemical composition, is better for this purpose than other available liquids. That the combination of the chemical action and the mechanical action of stomping provides a cleaning effect that no amount of water alone can replicate. This is why the barrels exist on every street. This is why the emperor taxes them, because they are economically necessary, not incidental. The collection of urine is a legitimate commercial activity in Rome, as established and regulated as the grain trade or the wine merchant's business. You've thought about this sometimes, in the way you've started thinking about all the invisible systems that keep the city running. You grew up in a fishing town. The sea was the invisible system there, the thing that everything else organized around, the fundamental fact of the economy. Fish came out of the sea, money came from the fish. Your father's work, your food, your future, all downstream from the sea. Here the invisible system is more complicated. The aqueducts bring the water in. The water runs through the baths and then through the latrines and then into the cloaca. The cloaca takes everything to the Tiber. The river takes it downstream. The collection barrels feed the fullers who clean the clothes. The clean clothes dress the people who do the work that generates the money that pays the taxes that maintain the aqueducts. Everything connects to everything else. And at the centre of the whole arrangement, organising it whether anyone acknowledges this or not, is the basic daily fact of what human bodies produce and where it goes. Gaius is already at his work table when you arrive. This is normal. You've never in 9 months beaten him to the shop. He is a man who seems to operate on a slightly different relationship to time than most people. Not that he's always early exactly, but that he's always already engaged with whatever needs engaging, already past the warming up stage, already in the middle of things. "You're here," he says, not looking up from the wax tablets he's examining. His stylus moves, makes a note. He's left-handed, which is still mildly unusual enough in Rome that patients occasionally comment on it, to which Gaius invariably responds by noting that left-handedness and diagnostic accuracy have no known relationship, and could they please get on with describing their symptoms? "I am," you say. "The Metella family has sent word." He turns a tablet over, squints at something on the reverse. Their young son. Second presentation of the same stomach complaint within a month. The one from the Subura? Adjacent to it, 3 streets north. He sets the tablet down and finally looks at you. His assessment look, the one that takes in everything from your posture to the colour of your skin to whatever is detectable in your general presentation, the look that reminds you he is always in some background process, reading the people around him the way other people read written text. You slept. I did. Well enough? Well enough? Good. He turns back to his tablets. The woman with the joint complaint from yesterday, Flavia. She sent her slave with a question about whether she should continue the willow bark or reduce it now that the swelling is better. What's your answer? Continue it through the end of the month, then reassess. I'll need you to write the reply. He pauses. Also, I want you to look at something before we see patients. Something I've been working through overnight. He leads you to the back room, the preparation space, narrow and deep, smelling of dried herbs and the sharp medicinal tang of the compounds you make there. The mortar and pestle sitting where you left them last night. The shelves of clay pots in their careful arrangement. He moves to a low chest in the corner and takes from it a rolled piece of papyrus. He spreads it on the work surface. It's a map of the Subura and the streets immediately surrounding it. You recognize his hand in the careful notation, the aqueduct connections marked in blue ink, the sewer access points in red, the fuller's workshops in a dark brown that is, you realize with a slight lurch of recognition, exactly the colour of the cloaca water at flood stage, and scattered across it, marks in black. Small circles, each with a date beside them. Stomach illness cases, you say. Stomach illness cases presenting with the specific profile we discussed. Violent onset. Duration of 4 to 7 days in otherwise healthy adults. Shorter in children but more severe. The very young and very old show the most serious presentations. He points to a cluster near the corner of the map. Look at the distribution. You look. The cluster is dense around 2 specific blocks in the lower Subura, then thinning outward in a pattern that isn't quite circular. It follows something. You're not sure what yet. They follow the streets, you say. They follow something under the streets. He traces a line on the map with his finger, from the cluster outward. There's a fuller's workshop here, he points, established about 18 months ago, larger than the previous operation, expanded into a second courtyard. Their waste drainage connects, I believe, though I haven't been able to verify, to a subsurface channel that runs beneath this street and this one, and which passes within about 10 feet of the water supply connection for these 3 fountains. You look at the fountains, look at the cases, look at the line between them. The water from those fountains, you say. Yes. People drink from those fountains. Most of the Subura does. The Aqua Claudia connection on the hill supplies the wealthy blocks and the baths. The street fountains in the lower district are on an older connection, less well maintained, with more joins and more potential for infiltration from the surrounding soil. And if the fuller's waste has contaminated the soil near those connections, then the contamination has a path into the water supply that people are drinking directly. He rolls the papyrus back up. I don't have proof. I have a hypothesis and a pattern, proving it would require access to the subsurface channels, which is controlled by the aqueduct office, who are not interested in sharing access with a private physician who they consider, a brief pause, eccentric. What do? We add more cases to the map. We look for cases that don't fit. That would disprove the hypothesis if it's wrong, and we treat what we can treat. He puts the map away. Come, the first patients will arrive shortly. You go to the preparation room and begin the morning work. The rhythmic, methodical, deeply familiar work of sorting herbs and grinding compounds, and checking supplies that has become so embedded in your body's daily rhythms that your hands do it while your mind is somewhere else entirely. Your mind is on the map, on the fuller's waste and the fountains, on the gap between what Gaius knows and what he can prove, on the gap between proof and action, and on the Airedale who's not interested in the opinion of an eccentric physician. You grind the morning's herbs. The smell of them rises, the sharp bite of the willow bark, the soft sweetness of the mint, the darker, more complex smell of the thyme, healing smells, the smell of things that work. The mortar and pestle make a steady rhythm against the stone. Outside, Rome continues its mourning. The first patient arrives while you're still grinding. She's a woman from 2 streets over, 40-something, with the kind of face that suggests she's been working with her hands since she was 7 years old and expects to continue working with her hands until she dies, which she regards as a reasonable arrangement. Her hands, indeed, are extraordinary, thick-fingered, deeply calloused, with a grip she demonstrates accidentally every time he moves something. She tells Gaius her stomach has been difficult for 5 days. He asks her which fountain she uses. She tells him. He marks it on an internal record he keeps in his head. You see him do it, the slight focusing of his eyes, the tiny pause that is not a pause to the outside world, but which you've learned to read as the filing of information. He treats her, a compound for the stomach, instructions for boiling the water she drinks for the next week, instructions to come back if the symptoms worsen. She leaves. The second patient, a child of perhaps 8, brought by his father, with the characteristic yellow tinge in the whites of his eyes that Gaius identifies in about 3 seconds as something specific and treatable, but requiring certain herbs you'll need to prepare fresh this afternoon. The third, an elderly man with a problem in his chest that is not new, has not been new for many years, and that Gaius treats with the particular gentle efficiency of a physician who understands that some conditions cannot be cured, but can be managed, and who has made his peace with the distinction. The fourth, the most interesting of the morning, though you don't know this when she walks in. She's perhaps 30, well dressed enough to be from a family that has some resources, not well dressed enough to be wealthy. She sits across from Gaius with her hands in her lap and her eyes doing something careful. She starts with her stomach. Gaius asks questions. She answers them. He asks about water. She answers. He asks about where she lives, and she describes a building you recognize. It's on the map, one of the streets with several cases, and then, partway through the examination, something shifts. You've seen this before in the months you've been here. The moment when a patient comes in with one complaint and then, when they feel safe enough, reveals the actual thing. She talks for a while longer than you'd expect about the stomach, and then she says, very quietly, still looking at her hands, "My daughter. She had the same thing. 3 weeks ago. She recovered, but..." A pause. "She was 3 years old," she says. "The stomach complaint was severe for 4 days. Her father said to wait, that it passes. It did pass. But She looks up. "If it comes back..." Gaius is quiet for a moment. Not the professional quiet of a man composing a diagnosis. Something else. "If it comes back," he says carefully, "come to me immediately. Don't wait." He looks at the woman steadily. "Which fountain does your daughter drink from?" she tells him. He marks it. "After she leaves, you stand in the preparation room and write her case in the daily record, and then you sit for a moment and think about a 3-year-old girl with a stomach illness. that might have been preventable if the aqueduct office had been willing to listen to an eccentric physician's theory about Fuller's waste and subsurface contamination. You write that down too. Not in the daily record, in your own tablet. The one you keep for your own thoughts and observations, the one Gaius doesn't read but encourages you to maintain. You write, the mother came for the stomach complaint. She came for herself. But what she was actually asking about was her daughter. About what to do if the 3-year-old gets sick again. About whether there is something she can do beyond waiting and hoping to keep her child alive in a city whose water supply may be contaminated at a level no one can currently prove. There is no good answer to give her. There is only, use the other fountain. Boil the water when you can. Come back if it gets worse. This is what medicine is mostly, not dramatic intervention. Incremental harm reduction in the face of systems too large to fix quickly and problems too complicated to solve cleanly. You file this and go back to grinding. The morning passes in its methodical way. Patients come, are assessed, are treated to the extent that treating is possible, and leave. You write, you prepare, you make notes, you learn. Around the 3rd hour, Gaius sends you out. I need you to go to the Metella household, he says. Take the standard stomach compound, the double preparation, and ask them specifically, how long has the boy been drinking from the street fountain as opposed to the building cistern water? Do they have a cistern? They have a connection to the Aqua Claudia supply through the building's distribution pipes. They should be using that. Ask why they're not. You take the compound wrapped in cloth. You put your leather case over your shoulder. You step out into the late morning street. Rome at the 3rd hour is a different creature than Rome at dawn. The streets have had time to warm up, metaphorically and literally. The traffic is denser, the noise is higher, the whole system operating at full speed. The vegetable sellers are doing their best business. The barbers are at work. The schoolmaster on the corner of the Via Sacra who conducts his lessons in the street because he has no room to spare is in the middle of explaining something to a group of 7 boys whose attention is roughly split between him and the pigeon on the column above his head. You navigate it. 9 months ago, these streets were terrifying, not dangerous exactly. You never felt physically threatened, which is something people from outside Rome often expect to feel and don't, but overwhelming in the specific way of a system that operates by rules you haven't learned yet. You couldn't read the traffic flow, couldn't predict which way the crowd would surge and which way would open up, couldn't tell which vendor would step in front of you and which one was focused elsewhere, couldn't see the puddle before you were in it. Now you move through it the way fish move through water. The city has become a medium you inhabit rather than a force you resist. But this morning, even with the familiar navigation, you keep thinking about the map, about the marks on it, about the fuller's workshop and its waste and its drainage channel and where that drainage channel connects to what. You think about systems, about how a city is a body, and about how in a body everything connects to everything else, and about how the thing that is meant to be separated, waste from water, dirty from clean, tends in a body and in a city to find its way back into contact with the things it was meant to stay away from. This is the fundamental problem of sanitation, not that people are careless or ignorant, but that the systems designed to keep things separated are imperfect, and the tendency of everything is toward mixing. You step around a dog, you keep walking. Let me tell you about the solutions, not just Rome's solution, the sponge in the saltwater bucket, the cloaca, the latrina with its running drainage channel. all of the solutions. Because this is the thing about the problem of human waste. It is universal. It has always been universal. And every culture that has ever existed has had to solve it with whatever they had. The solutions are not all the same. They are in many ways not even close to the same. And what's interesting, what Gaius has taught you to be interested in, is that the solution a culture chooses tells you something about that culture beyond the simple mechanics of the choice. Take the Chinese. You've never been to China. You've met two merchants from there, or from somewhere in the vast eastern territories that traders sometimes reference, in your time in Rome, and what they described was a civilization of baffling scale and baffling sophistication, in ways that your frame of reference could barely accommodate. Large cities, complex administration, vast systems of production, paper that was cheap enough to wrap things in. Here is something you don't know yet, but that is happening right now, as you walk through the streets of Rome in year 72. In China, paper has been in use for about a century. It was developed during the Han Dynasty from rags and bark and hemp fibre, pressed and dried and cut into sheets. It's used for writing, for records, for wrapping goods in transit, and somewhere in China, in this same year, or close to it, someone has already made the logical extension, has already understood that a sheet of soft material used once and then discarded is superior in several important ways to a material that must be cleaned and reused. The exact date of the first recorded Chinese mention of paper used this way is around the 6th century. A scholar writing that paper inscribed with the names of sacred sages should not be used for this purpose. He's drawing a distinction. Some paper is too sacred for this, which means that using paper for this purpose is already normal enough to require the distinction. By the 14th century, the Chinese imperial court will use 720,000 sheets per year. Per year. Different grades for different members of the household. The finest and softest reserved for the emperor himself. Systematic, hygienic, rational. The Western world will not arrive at this solution for another 1,500 years. Why? The answer is not intelligence. Chinese and Roman engineers and administrators are equally capable of practical reasoning. The answer is materials and economics. Paper in China is cheap, made from available agricultural materials produced at scale. Paper in Rome is expensive. Papyrus requires imports from Egypt, and the sheets it produces are valued for their information-carrying capacity. Using them for anything else is a waste of something valuable. So Rome continues with the sponge on the stick, with the stone, with the moss and the pottery fragments and the wool scraps. Take the Islamic world. What will happen in the 7th century? In the Arabia, that is, as you walk through Rome in year 72, a place of tribal complexity that Roman traders occasionally visit and Roman armies occasionally try to manage, is that a religion will arise that encodes very specific hygiene requirements into its religious law. The Quran and its associated text will specify, in considerable detail, the cleaning practice required after using the latrina. The istinja, water, and the left hand. The left hand because the right hand is reserved for greeting, for eating, for all activities that require no contamination. The left hand because its designation as the cleaning hand creates a permanent memory aid, a habit embedded in courtesy and custom and religious obligation. You cannot greet a fellow believer with your left hand without invoking a memory of what that hand is designated for. The memory keeps the practice consistent. This is medicine encoded in religion. The practice achieves a hygiene outcome. far superior to the shared sponge in terms of transmission prevention, requiring only water and one hand rather than a specialised implement and a bucket of brine. And it achieves this outcome in a population that doesn't know anything about germ theory, but that knows, by the evidence of its own observation, that certain practices lead to less illness. The religion didn't derive from medicine, but the medicine is there, embedded in the practice, functional whether or not the practitioners understand the mechanism. Take the Greeks. Athens, when it was at the height of its power, before Rome, before the Empire, when it was still the intellectual centre of the Mediterranean world, used stones, rounded, smooth stones collected from riverbanks and kept near the latrina for this purpose, individual stones, sometimes inscribed. Aristotle is believed to have kept a set. The individual stone is, in hygiene terms, considerably superior to the shared sponge. No transmission vector between users. You bring your own, you use it, you clean it yourself. The problem it doesn't solve is washing. You still need water to wash the stone and to wash your hands, and the access to water in an Athenian household is not guaranteed. But as a fundamental approach to the mechanics of the thing, it's sound reasoning. And then there are the practical improvised solutions, the ones that don't get written about because they're too obvious to discuss, too ordinary to merit documentation. Moss from the riverbanks in the wet northern provinces, where moss is abundant and soft and does the job better than you'd expect. Leaves in forested areas, and the choice of leaf matters, something every child in forested Europe learns by the kind of direct empirical experimentation that leaves a lasting impression. Corn husks in agricultural communities, rope ends aboard ships, where the rope is always at hand and the sea provides the rinsing water. The pages of old almanacs and calendars, torn away and softened by rubbing. Agricultural waste, the husks and the dried plant material that accumulates around any farming operation. In cold climates, snow. Packed snow has the advantage of cleanliness. It's fresh and white, and hasn't been through any previous use, and the disadvantage that it is very cold, which is perhaps not the experience most people would choose, but which the mathematics of available options sometimes makes the best one. And in coastal communities like the one where you grew up, salt water and a rag, or the ocean directly, which is the cleanest and most available option, and which sailors have used for as long as there have been sailors. None of these solutions is the same. None of them arose from the same set of cultural priorities or the same set of available materials. All of them solve the same fundamental problem. You reach the Metella household. The boy is 7 years old, dark-haired, with the wide eyes of a child who's been slightly frightened for several days. His mother is standing close, and her presence is the complicated kind. You can read it even across the room, that wants desperately to make things better, and can't quite believe that the best tool available is a physician's apprentice, arriving with a cloth-wrapped compound, and a question about fountains. You ask your questions. You learn that the building does have the Aqua Claudia connection, but that the distribution pipe in the upper floors, the floors they live on, has been blocked since last month. The slave who usually goes to the building manager to report these things was sick for 2 weeks, and by the time she recovered, the problem had been sitting for long enough that it felt enormous to fix, and so they'd been using the street fountain. You write this down. You give the mother the compound and the instructions and the note from Gaius about which fountain to use until the building's connection is repaired. You suggest strongly that the connection should be reported to the building manager today. He won't fix it quickly, the mother says. She says it without bitterness, just as fact. The flat statement of someone who has navigated building management in Rome for long enough to have no illusions about the timeline. No, you agree. Probably not quickly, but faster if you tell him the physician has connected the water problem to the boy's illness. She looks at you. Has he? Not officially, but the pattern is consistent. Tell the building manager that. She will. You can tell she's the kind of woman who will. You leave and walk back toward the Argoletum. The latrina is on your route. You've been walking past it for 9 months. Today, for the first time, you stop. The steps going down are worn marble, pale and smooth at the centre and rough at the edges. Exactly the pattern of stone worn by feet over centuries. The middle used more than the sides, and so the middle worn deeper, and so the middle more slippery, and so you step to the edge by instinct without quite knowing why. The smell arrives before the light changes. You've been managing this smell from the street for 9 months. From here, 3 steps down and inside the door, you understand that what you've been managing from the street is an extremely diluted version of the thing itself. The smell is not bad in the way of something wrong or contaminated. It's not the smell of illness or rot. It's more fundamental than that. It's the smell of what human bodies produce when they've finished with the food you've given them, multiplied by decades of use in a space with minimal ventilation, and it has the particular quality of something that has been here so long it has become structural, part of the building, part of the air. You breathe through your mouth. You go in. The room is larger than you expected. A stone rectangle, maybe 15 feet by 30, lit by openings near the ceiling that admit grey light but no direct sun at this angle in the morning. Stone benches run along 3 walls, each bench carved with holes at regular intervals. 14 holes total. You count without deciding to count. The physician's apprentice reflex that quantifies everything. 7 of the 14 are occupied. 7 men in various stages of their mourning, sitting on the stone in the relaxed posture of people who have made their peace with the communal nature of the arrangement. 2 of them are talking. One is reading a small scroll, holding it slightly away from his body, with the care of someone who doesn't want to put it down, but also doesn't quite want it touching certain surfaces. One is eating something, a piece of bread torn in half which he's tucking into his cheek, with the efficiency of someone for whom this is just a normal place to have breakfast. Under the bench, water. Running continuously, a channel built into the base of the wall, fed from the aqueduct flow, carrying everything away with a quiet, steady sound like a small river. You can see the movement if you look. The light from the ceiling openings glints off it, a dark, constant flow. Along the back wall, the cleaning channel, a narrower groove in the floor close to the bench, kept fresh by a separate supply pipe, and in the cleaning channel, at intervals, the buckets, the xylospongium, the tussorium, the sponge on the stick. 4 buckets, positioned so that each serves roughly 3 to 4 positions on the bench. Each bucket holds salt water. You can smell it, a clean salt smell that stands out distinctly against the rest of the room's olfactory composition. The sponges sit in the water, submerged, each one a rounded natural sea sponge of the kind sold in the market near the wharves, attached to a stick of smooth wood perhaps a foot long. You look at them for a long time. You think about the patient this morning, the woman with the 3-year-old who had the stomach illness. You think about the map on Gaius's table and the marks on it. You think about what Gaius said about transmission, about the way illness moves through contact with a shared surface, a single sponge, used by perhaps 20 people in a day, in this latrina, which is one of 144 public latrinae in the city. In a city of 1 million people. The man reading the scroll looks up at you. First time, he says. There's no judgment in it. It's just a question. I've been by before, you say. Not in. Ah. He goes back to his scroll. It gets less strange. I'm a physician's apprentice, you say, which is not quite an answer. He pauses with his scroll, looks at you again with slightly more interest. Studying the latrinae? Studying where illness comes from. He's quiet for a moment. Then he says, with the casual conversational ease of a man talking to a stranger in a shared space, I had a terrible stomach illness last spring. Lasted 6 days. Lost so much weight my wife thought I was dying. Where do you live? Near the Fuller's Row on the Argiletum side of the Subura. You note this. You will tell Gaius. Did you recover fully? Completely, strong as before. He tilts his scroll. Do you think it came from here? I don't know yet, you say. That's what we're trying to determine. He looks at the sponge buckets, then at the walls, then back at his scroll. Well, he says, with the philosophy of a man who has accepted a risk he cannot currently remove from his life, I suppose it's this or the streets. Yes, you agree, the streets are worse. Considerably. He nods, satisfied with this analysis, and goes back to his reading. You stay for another moment, looking at the running water under the bench, the careful engineering of it, the Roman instinct to build a system, to solve the problem at the level of infrastructure, to make the individual interaction with the problem as clean and automatic as possible. The water comes in from one end, takes everything with it, goes out to the cloaca, reaches the Tiber. That part works. That part is genuinely brilliant. The sponge in the bucket is where the system falls short. Not through any failure of engineering. There's no engineering solution available to them here. No way with current technology to give each person a private implement without enormous cost and waste. The sponge is the best available compromise and it works, mostly for the mechanics of the situation. The salt water does something. The sea sponge has mild antimicrobial properties that the Romans don't understand mechanistically but have observed empirically. The salt water bucket is not incidental. Someone observed that it helped, even without knowing why. But it doesn't fully solve the transmission problem. And the transmission problem is the map on Gaius's table. You leave. Back in the street, you breathe the outdoor air, which smells, by comparison, almost refreshing. The fuller's workshop is next door to the latrina. Coincidence of city layout, or possibly not entirely coincidence, given that both operations run on the same resource in complementary ways. The workshop is open to the street in the Roman fashion. A wide wooden door folded back against the wall, the interior visible. You've never been inside a fuller's workshop. You stop in the doorway. The vats are enormous, each one perhaps 5 feet across and 3 feet deep, sunk into the floor, the edges worn and stained dark with use. There are 8 of them visible from the doorway, arranged in 2 rows, and in each vat there is cloth. Pale wool, mostly the natural colour of sheep, soaking in a liquid that you know to be, and which smells to be, the product of the collection barrel in your alley. 3 men work in the nearest vats. They're standing in them, ankle deep, treading with a steady rhythmic motion. Their legs are bare from the knee down and pale in a specific way. The kind of pale that comes from long exposure to ammonia compounds, which bleaches skin gradually in the same way it bleaches cloth. Their faces are expressionless with the concentration of people doing repetitive physical work that requires just enough attention to prevent wandering. A fourth man is stirring a completed vat with a long wooden paddle, moving the cloth in slow circles. A fifth is wringing finished cloth over a stone trough, his forearms bulging with the effort, the liquid running back into the trough in a steady stream. The smell is layered in the particular way of a space that combines the main process smell with underlying notes of the building, the workers, the dyes that stain the walls in colours that have been absorbed over years of operation. It's not pleasant, but it's also not quite what you expected. There's a chemical cleanness to it, underneath the obvious assault. The ammonia is doing its work. A man in a clean tunic, cleaner than the workers' tunics, the mark of someone whose job is management rather than labour, appears from the back of the room. He looks at you in the doorway with the expression of someone calculating whether you're a customer, a nuisance, or a problem. "Can I help you?" "I'm studying where the workshop's drainage connects," you say, which is true but not complete. "Physician's business?" He doesn't look entirely convinced. "The drainage goes to the sewer, like everyone's." "Which connection?" "The one on the east side of the building. What's this about?" "There may be a proximity issue with the drinking water supply in the adjacent block. My master is mapping the connections." The workshop owner is quiet for a moment. He has the look of a man doing the calculation about whether this is going to cost him anything. "We're within all the regulations," he says. "I'm sure you are. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm just..." You gesture at the building, the workshop, the street, trying to understand the layout. He relaxes slightly, not friendly exactly, but no longer defensive. The drainage comes out of the back, runs along the wall of the building next to us, the grain merchant, and connects to the main sewer line about 30 feet from here. Underground? Underground. There's an inspection port near the far end of the grain merchant's building. You can see it if you look, the iron grate in the pavement. You thank him. You walk down the street and look at the pavement until you find the iron grate. You look through the grate. Below, darkness, the sound of water moving, the sewer channel. You mark the position in your memory and then realize you've been marking things in your memory all morning and that you should write them down before they start to blur together. You find a doorway out of the flow of foot traffic and take out your tablet. You write, "Fuller's workshop drainage connects to main sewer line approximately 30 feet from the workshop entrance, via the back wall of the adjacent building. Inspection port located at approximately..." You estimate the coordinates in terms of distance from the nearest landmark. The fountain, approximately 50 feet south of the fountain, on the corner of the Fuller's Street. You write, "If the sewer channel at this point runs parallel to the water supply pipe from the Aqua Claudia connection on the hill, and if there is any infiltration between the two channels at any point along this 50-foot stretch, then the contamination path from Fuller's waste to drinking water supply is established." You write, "Need to determine depth and course of both pipes. Cannot do this without access to aqueduct office records. Have not been granted access. Will try again." You look at what you've written. Add, "Alternatively, establish contamination by comparing illness rates in households using this fountain versus households using the hill fountain. Need at least 30 cases for statistical reliability. Currently have 11 that map to this hypothesis. Need more." You close the tablet. You walk back to the Argiletum. The flood starts after the 4th hour. You don't see it begin. Nobody ever sees it begin. The Tiber floods from the north, from the mountains where the rain has fallen 2 days ago, and travel down through the river system with the patient inevitability of water following topography. And by the time the leading edge reaches the low neighbourhoods of Rome, It arrives not as a dramatic wave, but as a slow spreading. The water appearing in the streets the way a carpet of mist appears on a cold morning, low and advancing and not yet threatening, but unmistakably present. Gaius sees it from the doorway of the shop. You hear him say something short and specific to himself. Not a curse exactly, more like an acknowledgement. And then he's back inside, moving to the back room. "Get the kit," he says. "We'll go to the Decius household first. They're in the flood zone and the old woman can't navigate stairs." You get the kit. Your leather case, heavier now with the morning's refills. You follow Gaius out. The street outside the Argoletum is not yet flooded. It's on slightly higher ground than the valley of the Subura. But you can see, at the end of the street where it dips toward the lower neighbourhood, a darkness on the pavement that means wet. And wet in this context means the Tiber has arrived. Gaius moves quickly. You follow him through streets that you know are about to change character. The shops are beginning to respond. Vendors pulling goods back from the street, lifting displays off ground level, calculating the water's likely height against their investment in floor-level merchandise. A baker is moving a rack of bread with the resigned efficiency of someone who has done this at least 10 times before. A woman is shouting from a second-floor window at a man below who is not responding with the urgency she feels is appropriate. The water meets you at the corner of the Via Sacra, not deep, perhaps 4 or 5 inches, moving slowly but steadily, with the direction that water takes when it has decided where it wants to go. It's brown. Not the clear brown of river water. This is a different composition. The water that has been through the street and picked up everything the street accumulates, which is to say everything. You lift your tunic above your knees. Gaius has already done this, moving through the water with the practiced ease of a man who knows exactly how to navigate this particular inconvenience. You follow him, your feet. Cold, colder than November air cold, river cold, the specific cold of water that came from mountain snowmelt not long ago, and rough against your bare feet. The cobblestones have a texture that your sandals usually manage, grit and accumulated deposition, and the edges of the stones where they've heaved apart over the years, and the smell, changed dramatically from the street smell you know. The water carries everything with it, everything the street held and everything the sewer can no longer contain because the Tiber's level has risen above the sewer's outflow point, and now the flow is reversed, the water that should be moving away from the city moving back into it, and everything it carries with it. You breathe through your mouth. You keep walking. Gaius reaches the Decius building and takes the stairs 2 at a time. He is, for a man of his age, surprisingly fast when he has reason to be. You follow. Upstairs, above the flood level, the air is better, almost normal. Lucia Decia is in her bed. She looks at Gaius with the expression of someone who has had enough of the situation. Not the illness specifically, but the whole arrangement of being old and ill in a city that periodically floods. "Is it bad?" she asks. "Not this year," Gaius says. "The usual. It'll peak by evening and drain by tomorrow morning." He's already at her wrist, checking her pulse with 2 fingers. "How's the stomach?" "Better than yesterday." "Worse than last week," she considers. "The same as last week." He makes a sound that is neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, the sound of a man updating his model. Her daughter is in the corner, doing the quietly anxious waiting that families do when a physician is in the room. You stand near the door and write what Gaius says, and what the patient says and what he determines. The 2 grandchildren are on a bench below the window, watching the street below where the flood water moves. "It's going up," the older one says. Don't lean out, the daughter says, without looking up from her watching of Gaius. It's going up a lot. Don't lean out. Gaius finishes his examination. He adjusts the stomach compound's dosage. He has a brief conversation with the daughter about the water situation, where they're getting it, whether they're boiling it, the distinction he keeps making between the hill supply and the valley supply, and he takes his leave with a particular briskness of a man who has 3 other places to be in a city that is currently inconvenient to travel through. You follow him back down the stairs. The flood has risen while you are inside. Now it's perhaps 8 inches, still manageable, still below the knee, but no longer trivially so. The current is more defined. In some of the narrower alleys, you can feel it tugging at your feet, trying to direct you. You wade. You think, as you wade through the floodwater of Rome in November of the year 72, about what Gaius said this morning about the body in the city, about how the city's sanitation system is, when it works, a model of engineered flow, everything directed, everything moving, everything ending up where it's supposed to end up. And how when the Tiber rises and the sewer backs up, the whole model reverses, and instead of waste moving away from the living spaces of the city, it moves into them, and the contamination that the engineering keeps separate becomes, temporarily, everywhere. The flood is not a disaster this year. This is a nuisance flood, a management flood. The kind that Romans who have lived here for decades discuss with mild irritation rather than fear. But the nuisance flood still carries what it carries, and what it carries is the fuller's workshop waste and the public latrina overflow and the cloaca's backed up contents moving through the streets at ankle height. 3 weeks from now, the illness reports in the Subura will spike. Gaius knows this. He's already factoring it in, already planning for the increased caseload, already mentally calculating which neighbourhoods will be worst affected and in what sequence. The flooding creates a temporary direct connection, he says, reading your thoughts with the disconcerting accuracy he sometimes demonstrates, between the subsurface contamination, I suspect, and the living environment of everyone in the flood zone. What might be, in normal conditions, a slow trickle of exposure through a compromised water connection becomes a bath in the combined output of the city's waste systems. How many cases do you expect? 30 to 40 in the first 2 weeks after the water recedes in the most affected streets. This is based on previous years. He steps over something. The Adil's records, which I managed to review 3 years ago before the current Adil decided I was eccentric, showed a consistent pattern of illness spikes following the Tiber floods in the Subura district, consistent for at least 20 years of records. And before that? Before that, the records are less systematic, but Pliny mentions it. There's a reference in an older text to autumn illness following the Tiber floods. This is a known phenomenon. It has been known for a long time. And it still happens. It still happens. You wait in silence for a moment, because nobody's fixed the flood barrier that would prevent the sewer from backing up, you say, which would cost money, which the Treasury can provide, but which requires a political decision that the current administration is not interested in making, for a neighbourhood populated primarily by people without the political means to make it expensive to ignore them. The streets of Rome, in the light of a November morning with 4 to 8 inches of flood water moving through them, you pass a group of 3 men who are standing in the water looking at something. A shop front you see as you get closer, where the water has gotten under the door and begun the slow work of ruining whatever was stored at floor level. The shopkeeper is standing in the doorway watching the water with the expression of a man doing an inventory of his losses. You pass an old woman who has come to her second-floor window, apparently to report on the situation to someone in the street below. You pass 2 children, smaller than the Decius grandchildren, who are wading through the water with the unbridled glee of children experiencing a disruption to ordinary rules, splashing each other while an adult shouts at them from an upper window. You pass the public latrina, the steps are submerged. The water runs down them into the space below, which means the drainage channel is now not draining but receiving, the flood water adding itself to the regular contents, and the cleaning buckets and whatever of the aqueduct supply still running, the whole arrangement inverted. You think about the man reading his scroll this morning, wonder if he's managed his morning routine already, or whether the flood has complicated his situation. You keep walking. The baths are closed. They've closed the moment the flood became real, which is sound policy. The last thing you want in a flood is the Thermes drainage system contributing to the street level water, but it means that the afternoon's plan has changed. Gaius redirects to 2 home visits and then back to the shop. You go, you treat, you write, you note. By the early afternoon the flood water has peaked, perhaps 10 inches in the lowest sections of the Subura, and begun very slowly to recede. The Tiber has taken back a fraction of what it pushed up. The flow in the streets has slowed. You can navigate without the water tugging at your feet. The smell will linger for days. You know this now. The flood water leaves behind a residue as it recedes, a thin coating of everything it was carrying, deposited on the pavement and the base of the walls and the first 2 steps of every building, drying in the November air into a dust that Rome will not fully clean away until either the next rain or the next flood washes it off and carries it somewhere else. Gaius is quieter than usual for the rest of the day. He treats his patients and makes his notes and eats the midday meal, bread and olives from the shop across the street, with the efficiency of a man fueling himself rather than enjoying his lunch. He gives you afternoon tasks, grinding, organising, preparing the monthly report for the medical guild. But you can tell he's thinking, the slight focusing of his eyes, the way he occasionally stops what he's doing for half a second longer than the task requires. At the end of the day, when you've written the last record and organised the last supply, he says, "I'm going to try the aqueduct office again. For the inspection, for the maps, the subsurface maps of the distribution pipes and the sewer connections in the Subura district." He folds the daily records closed. The flood changes the calculation. If I can show a spike in illness cases after today's flood in the specific streets I've mapped, and if I can get the maps to show the connection I believe exists between the Fuller's drainage and the water supply, the evidence becomes considerably stronger. Will they listen? He's quiet for a moment. "Probably not this year," he says. "Maybe next year. If the spike is severe enough." He stands. "Go to the baths if they've reopened. You smell of the flood." You do smell of the flood. The baths have reopened. The thermae in the Argiletum district are not the grand imperial establishments, not the massive marble vaulted spaces built by emperors as expressions of architectural ambition and political generosity, but they are solid and well maintained, and the water is genuinely hot and genuinely clean, fed from the Aqua Virgo, the cleanest aqueduct in the city. The attendant at the door knows you by now. You've been 9 times, and nods you through without comment. You undress in the apoditerium, hang your tunic on a peg, look at it for a moment, the hem still damp from the morning's wading, stained at the bottom with whatever the flood water deposited. The Fuller will have an interesting time with that. Through to the tepidarium. The warm room is a different world from the street. The heat comes up through the floor, a system of channels beneath the stone that circulate hot air, the hypercaust, a piece of Roman engineering that you consider every time you stand on it and feel the warmth rising through your feet. Someone designed this. Someone built the channels and the furnace and the distribution system and tested it and refined it until the heat came up evenly through the floor. Somewhere underground, a slave is feeding wood into the furnace right now. The heat connects you to that work even though you can't see it. The tepidarium smells of warm stone and the particular clean mineral smell of well-maintained bathwater, and, underneath everything, something faintly vegetal from the oils that the bath attendants use. You sit. Your body begins to do what bodies do when they're in the right temperature, releases things. The tension in your shoulders, which you'd forgotten was there until it starts to leave. The specific tightness in the muscles of your feet from 9 months of walking Roman streets. The mental accumulation of the day, the cases, the map, the flood, the smell, the sponge in the bucket, beginning to sort itself into something more manageable. Then the caldarium, the hot room. The heat here is close to painful at the edges of your perception, the steam thick enough to reduce visibility to perhaps 6 feet. Stone benches along the walls, a central pool of very hot water that you don't use. Too hot for you yet, though the Romans who've been doing this all their lives sit at the edge and lower themselves in with the practiced ease of comfort. A bath slave appears at your elbow, a young man, perhaps 14, with the blank professional expression of someone performing a service. He has a strigil, a bronze instrument, curved and blunt-tipped, designed to scrape the skin of someone who is sweating heavily, and thereby remove the sweat and the oil and the accumulated material of a day's living. You've experienced this enough times now that you've developed opinions about it. The technique matters. Too hard, and it's abrasive in an unpleasant way. The right pressure, the right angle, the short pulling strokes along the grain of the skin. This produces the particular combination of sensation that you can only describe as clean in a way that feels physical rather than just aesthetic. The slave works with the efficiency of someone who's done this 8 times already today, and will do it another 6 times before the baths close. His strokes are practiced, angle consistent, pressure calibrated. What comes off on the strigil is a grey-brown material that you've learned not to examine, but which represents, as Gaius explained to you once with the dispassionate clarity of a scientist, the outermost layer of the negotiation between your skin and the environment it's been moving through. You sweat. The heat takes everything out through your pores that the morning hadn't managed to get through other means. The flood residue, the morning's herbs, the accumulated weight of 9 months of a city that gets into you through every available channel. After the caldarium, the cold plunge, every time, every single time. The cold is absolute. Mountain spring cold, aqua virgo cold, the temperature of water that has travelled 50 miles underground and arrived in this pool without ever touching the sun. You lower yourself in with the quick, deliberate motion that is the only way to manage it. 3 seconds of shock so complete that thought stops. And then, almost immediately, something that you will never find the right word for. Not pleasure exactly, not relief exactly, but a physical state of being in which your body has been so entirely reset by the temperature change that it feels like a different body than the one that went into the heat. You count to 10, you get out, dried with rough linen, dressed. You sit in the outer room, the apoditerium, for a while. The cooling down time, which is also the social time. People here after the baths, eating food from the vendors near the entrance, talking in the easy way of people who've been through a shared experience, which is what the baths are, whether or not anyone thinks of them that way. The man beside you is eating chickpeas from a small clay bowl. He's perhaps 30, with forearms that mark him as someone who works with his hands. Baker, he says, noticing you noticing. Physician's apprentice. He raises his eyebrows. Good work if you can manage the sight of it. Most of my work is reading patterns, you say, not so much blood. What kind of patterns? Illness and location. Which neighbourhoods have which illness rates? Where the water comes from and how that connects to what people die of. He eats a chickpea, considers this. I'm in the Vicus Tuscus, he says. Third shop from the corner. We use the hill supply. The Aqua Claudia connection comes right to the building. The landlord is a decent man, maintains the pipes. Do you know your neighbour's water situation? He looks at you with slightly more attention. Why? My master is trying to map the relationship between water sources and stomach illness in the adjacent district. If I could compare the illness rates in buildings with the Aqua Claudia connection versus buildings using the street fountains in the valley. He's thinking. The Baker 2 building's from me, he says. He uses the fountain. His family had a bad autumn for stomach trouble. And the dyer on the corner, he lost a worker to fever in September. Don't know what kind of fever, he pauses. I can ask around, if it would help your master's map. It would help considerably. He offers the bowl. You take a chickpea. Quintus, he says. Lucius. Good. He finishes the bowl. Come to the shop sometime. I'll tell you what I know about the neighbourhood water situation, and I make good bread. You remember this. You write his name in your memory. Quintus, Baker, Vicus Tuscus, Aqua Claudia connection, neighbourhood knowledge, and file it next to the morning's accumulation. Outside the baths, the afternoon is moving toward evening. The floodwater is still visible in the low streets, perhaps 6 inches now, still moving, still depositing its cargo on the lower walls. But the sky above is clear, and the air has the particular quality of cold, clean November that Rome gets in the afternoon, when the morning's fires have burned down and the evenings haven't started yet. You walk back to the Argiletum. Gaius is still at his desk when you arrive, still writing. The baths were open, you say. Good. I met a baker, Quintus, in the Vicus Tuscus. He's willing to survey his neighbours about water sources and illness rates. Gaius looks up. This is not what he expected. You recruited a data source. He offered. How? You describe the conversation. Gaius looks at you for a moment with an expression you don't quite know how to read. Something between assessment and something softer. That's useful, he says. Then, that's more than useful. If I have neighbourhood-level data from someone who lives there and knows his neighbours, I can triangulate. He stops. Write it up. The conversation. Everything he said about the baker 2 buildings away and the dyer. You write it up. Outside, Rome transitions from day to evening. A transition that happens gradually and then all at once. The light going from gold to orange to the particular blue-grey of a Roman dusk. The street sounds shifting register as the day workers head home and the night workers begin to appear. Gaius finishes something he's writing. He reads it back to himself with his lips moving slightly. A habit you've noticed is something he does with material he considers important. Sit down, he says. You sit. He spreads his papyrus on the table between you, the map, the one with the marks, but extended now, more marks added in today's hand. Here, he says, pointing to the cluster you identified this morning. And here, the cases from the past 2 weeks. Look at the distribution again now that you know where the sewer access point is. You look. The sewer access point, the iron grate in the pavement, the one you found this morning, sits at the edge of the cluster, just on the boundary where the case density starts to thin. The contamination would move downstream from the access point, you say, in the direction of the water flow. Yes. And the cases thin out in the direction away from the flow. Yes. This is consistent with your hypothesis. Consistent with, not proof of, but he traces the distribution with his finger. The shape of the cluster corresponds with a plausible contamination plume from the access point. Given what I know about the gradient of the terrain and the likely direction of subsurface water movement. You look at the map for a long time. What would disprove this, you ask? This is something Gaius has been teaching you, to always ask what would disprove a theory, because a theory you can't disprove is not yet a theory. It's just a belief, he thinks. Cases appearing upstream of the access point at similar or higher rates than downstream, or cases distributed without regard to terrain, spread evenly in all directions, or a cluster centered on a different water source entirely, or, most damning, an investigation showing the sewer and water supply pipes don't actually pass close enough to each other to allow contamination. So the aqueduct office maps are essential. Essential. He rolls the papyrus. I sent a letter this afternoon. Formal request. The third in 2 years. He sets the roll aside. We'll see. He gives you the evening's tasks. You do them. Later than you usually work because the day's disruptions pushed everything back. You sit in the preparation room with the lamp burning and the door to the street open a crack to admit the cooler air, and you write your own record for the day. This is not the medical record. That's in Gaius's tablets written in the official hand. This is yours, the one in your own tablet, in your own hand, smaller and less careful but more complete. Not just what happened, but what you thought about what happened. The map and the fuller and the grate in the pavement, the flood and the woman with the 3-year-old and the man in the latrina reading his scroll. The way it all connects. You write. The city produces what it produces every day, and it cannot stop producing it, and the question is only where it goes. When the system works, it goes underground and away. When the system fails, when the Tiber rises, when a pipe leaks, when the fuller's drainage gets too close to the water supply, it comes back. It was never gone, only directed, and direction is a constant effort. Stop maintaining the direction, and things return to their natural state, which is mixed, which is everywhere, which is the condition that produces illness. You write. Every society is doing this calculation all the time, whether they know it or not. The Islamic societies that encode the left hand and the water into religious law are calculating that the cost of the ritual is lower than the cost of the contamination it prevents. The Romans who built the Cloaca Maxima are calculating that the cost of the infrastructure is lower than the cost of the illness it prevents. The man with the shared sponge and the saltwater bucket is calculating that this is the best available option with the available resources. Everyone is calculating, you write. The difference between successful public health and unsuccessful public health is not that one society is smarter than the other. It is that one society has found a way to pay for the maintenance of the direction. You close the tablet. You go upstairs to the attic room. Titus is asleep. Marcus is still awake, sitting up on the mattress with his knees to his chest. How was it? He asks. Flood, you say. I saw. It was already receding when I came home. He shifts. Bad cases? The usual flood complications. Nothing catastrophic this year. You sit on the edge of the mattress and take off your sandals. I went into the public latrina. He looks at you. Gaius sent you. I went myself. I wanted to see the sponges. He's quiet for a moment. I used the one near the fuller's workshop, he says. I know. Is it? He doesn't quite finish the question. The salt water helps, you say. The sea sponge has some protective properties. The running water under the bench removes things quickly. You pause. It's not ideal, but it's what's available. So what do? Clean your hands carefully afterward. Use the vinegar solution from the preparation room. Gaius lets us use it. And in the mornings, use the chamber pot when you can and save the latrina for later in the morning when it's been more recently cleaned. He thinks about this. That's a lot of thinking about it, he says. Yes, you agree it is. You lie back on the mattress. The sounds of Rome come through the gaps in the shutters. The night sounds lower and more intermittent than the day sounds, punctuated by the cartwheels on the cobblestones. A dog. A drunk singing somewhere, not badly. A travelling song from somewhere south. The flood will be gone by morning, Marcus asks. Probably. Gaius says it usually recedes overnight if the rain in the north was the cause rather than a sustained storm. And then everything back to normal. And then you think about the map, about the marks, about the Aqua Claudia and the fuller's drainage and the iron grate in the pavement. And then the residue and the usual cases in 2 weeks. You really do think about this all the time. Gaius says a physician who isn't thinking about the city as a patient is only treating symptoms. Marcus considers this. Is the city a patient? I think it might be, you say. He lies down. The mattress shifts. You're strange, he says without malice. But you're going to be a good physician. You don't answer. You're already thinking about the map. December comes to Rome and the city does not, as some people from the provinces expect, slow down. Rome in winter is the same Rome as in summer, only colder and wetter, and with a different quality of light. The sun lower and the shadows longer, and the narrow streets even more confined by the absence of the bright September light that used to make everything seem slightly more manageable. The streets are the same, the work is the same, the chamber pot is the same, only colder in your hands when you carry it down in the mornings, and the water in the rinsing bucket has a cold that enters your fingers with the focused intention of cold water in stone vessels in November, which is to say deeply and with commitment. But the city does not slow down. The carts run all night on the cobblestones. The Fullernica down the alley starts its stomping before dawn. The vendors on the Via Sacra are in position with the first light. The patients come to Gaius's shop one after another, their complaints shifted by the season. More chest ailments now, more of the wheezing that comes from months of coal-fire smoke in enclosed spaces. More joint pain that's worse in the cold, more of the chilblains that come from hands and feet that are never quite warm enough in the tenement rooms where working people sleep. You've learned the winter pattern. Gaius has been teaching it for months, not with explicit lessons, but with cases shown to you and then named, built into your understanding one presentation at a time. The medical year in Rome has its rhythms like the agricultural year has its rhythms, and by December you can feel the season in the caseload the way a farmer feels it in the fields. What you could not have predicted, what you're still not quite able to predict, though you're getting better, is the flood aftermath. 3 weeks after the November flood, exactly as Gaius said, the cases come. 41 in the Subura and adjacent streets. 41 cases of the stomach complaint presenting with the specific profile Gaius has been tracking. The violent onset, the duration, the particular severity pattern in children under 5. 41 cases mapped on the papyrus, added to the marks already there, filling in the distribution pattern until it looks less like a scattering and more like a shape with edges and a centre, a shape that corresponds to the hypothesis. Gaius writes his 4th letter to the aqueduct office. He writes it carefully. He includes the maps. He includes the case data, dated and located. He includes the timeline, cases concentrated in the 3 weeks post-flood, in the specific streets adjacent to the hypothesized contamination path, thinning out in the directions that a subsurface contamination plume would not reach. He sends it with a messenger who has been told to wait for a response. The messenger returns 4 hours later. The aqueduct office will review the materials and respond within the standard administrative period. The standard administrative period, in Gaius's experience, is between 3 weeks and never. He takes the letter the messenger brings back and puts it in the box where he keeps the previous 3. 4 years of letters, you say. 4 years and 2 months. He sits at his desk. The first letter was sent to the previous Aedial, who was somewhat more engaged than the current one and actually sent someone to look at the grate I identified. This someone who came to look was an infrastructure slave who reported that the sewer line and the water supply pipe in that section were approximately 12 feet apart, and that in his assessment this was adequate clearance. Was it? It would be adequate clearance if both pipes were fully intact and the soil between them was solid and dry. After a heavy flood event, neither of those conditions is guaranteed. He picks up his stylus, puts it down. But the slave was working from a surface inspection. He didn't go underground, and the records he had access to showed the pipes as having been installed to standard specifications when originally built, which was approximately 60 years ago. 60 years. Rome is an old city. Many of its pipes are older than that. You think about the iron grate in the pavement, about the water sound you heard through it, about 60 years of the same pipe, under the same street, through 60 years of floods and soil movement and the expansion and contraction of clay in the wet and dry cycles of a city that alternates between flooding and drought. The pipes might have shifted, you say. The pipes might have cracked. Joined sections might have separated. The clearance between the sewer and the supply line might be 12 feet in one location and 4 feet in another. He opens a drawer and takes out the latest map. I believe this is what has happened. I cannot prove it without an underground inspection. The underground inspection requires either the aqueduct officer's cooperation, or a very large bribe, or someone willing to climb into the inspection port without authorization. He looks at you. I'm not suggesting, he begins. I wasn't. Good. A pause. Though if someone were to observe, you begin. No, Gare says firmly. The sewer slaves who die of the gases in enclosed spaces are a known occupational hazard. You're not a sewer slave. I understand. You are, however, going to Quintus the baker's shop tomorrow morning before you come here. He sent word that he's assembled some information about his neighbour's water use and illness history. You go. Quintus's shop on the Vicus Tuscus is a genuinely excellent baker's shop, which is not something you could have said with any authority 6 months ago, but which you have since become capable of assessing. The bread is made from well-milled flour, the crusts properly formed, the interior texture of the day's first batch, which is what you arrive to, the morning's first loaves, has a quality that Quintus, when you ask him about it, will explain in terms of the particular grain merchant he sources from, and the hydration ratio of his dough, and the temperature of the morning fire. But first, the information. He spreads it on the counter, actual written notes, which surprises you, written in a hand that's competent without being educated. The handwriting of someone who learned to write for practical purposes. My neighbour on the left, the sandal maker, Quintus says, pointing to his notes. Aqua Claudia connection. Comes through the building, his family, healthy, all autumn, no stomach complaints. And on the right? The other baker, Gaius, different Gaius. He uses the street fountain, the one at the corner of our street. He points to another note. His apprentice had 6 days of stomach illness in November. His wife had 4 days. He himself was fine, which tells you something. What does it tell you? He's been here 30 years. His wife is from Capua, been here 10 years. The apprentice is from the country, arrived in September. He taps the counter. The people who've been here longest seem to get sick less often, or recover faster. You write this. It's something Gaius has noticed too, a kind of acquired resistance in long-term Rome residents to certain stomach presentations. He's not sure what it means mechanistically, but the pattern is consistent. The dyer's widow, Quintus continues, she's across the street, uses the corner fountain. She lost her husband in September, not the stomach illness, a lung fever, but she's had 2 bouts herself, the second one in November, right after the flood. You note the timing, right after the flood. Anyone else? He has 3 more cases, 2 using the street fountain, 1 using a building cistern that connects to the hill supply. The fountain users had illness, the cistern user didn't. That's 7 data points, you say. Is that enough? It helps. My master has 41 cases mapped in the Subura. Your 7, properly located and timed, strengthen the spatial pattern considerably. You look up from your writing. Would you be willing to let me visit your neighbours? To take their testimonies directly for the medical record? He considers this. I'll introduce you, he says. They'll talk to you if they know you're connected to a physician. Thank you. Bread. He takes a loaf from the rack, just baked, still warm, the crust making a slight crackling sound when he touches it. You eat bread. It's very good bread. The crust is right. The interior has a slight tang that comes from the starter he uses. A culture that's apparently been alive for 15 years, and that Quintus treats with the careful attention some people give to valued relationships. You eat standing at the counter, and you think about the baker and his neighbour and the sandal maker and the 7 data points, and how each one of these is a person who woke up one morning with a stomach illness and spent 4 to 6 days closer to death than any of them knew, in a city where the water that should be clean is close, too close, to the water that carries what the city doesn't need anymore. And none of them knew why. That's the thing that stays with you as you walk to the first neighbour's house. They got sick and they recovered, most of them, and they told people about it the way people tell stories about bad things that happen, as something that came from outside, a visitation, a winter illness, the kind of thing that happens sometimes, not as a problem that has a cause, that has a solution, that has a cost, that has a decision, that has a responsible party who has chosen not to make it. The connection between the fuller's drainage and the street fountain is invisible to everyone but Gaius, and Gaius can't prove it yet, and so it stays invisible, and the water continues to carry what it carries, and in 2 weeks or 2 months or at the next flood there will be 41 more cases, and possibly some of them will be the sandal maker's wife or the baker's apprentice, or a 3-year-old who had the illness once and survived it, but might not survive it again. You knock on the sandal maker's door. He answers. You explain. He talks. You write. The work is incremental. It is the most slowly gratifying work you've ever done. Each case, each data point, each conversation adds a fraction more to the picture on the papyrus. The picture is becoming something real, a true map of how illness moves through this city, how it follows the water and the waste and the invisible underground channels between them. The map won't be finished for years. Gaius knows this. You're starting to know it too. This is a life's work, not a month's. But it matters that the work is being done. On your way back to the Argoletum, you stop at the public latrina again. This time it's familiar. You've been here twice now. You know the smell, the light, the texture of the stone bench under your hand as you press your palm to it to see what the morning's cleaning has left. The cleaning channel is running. The buckets are fresh. Someone has changed the salt water, the brine clean and pale. You sit for a moment, not to use the facility, you don't need to, but to sit with the space, to think about what this place is. It is in its way a remarkable thing. The engineering of it is sound, the running water, the drainage, the separate cleaning channel, the aqueduct supply. The Romans looked at the problem of public waste disposal in a city of 1 million people, and they solved it with stone and water and careful infrastructure. The individual experience of using this place is communal in a way that modern sensibility would not choose, but functional. The sponge in the bucket is not the failure. The sponge in the bucket is someone doing the best they could with the available materials to make the space usable by everyone, and they did it with knowledge of what sea sponge and salt water can do, even without knowing why. The failure, if failure is the right word, is the connection between this place and the larger system, between what the running water under this bench carries and where it goes and what it connects to on its way to the Tiber. That's a solvable problem. It requires maps and inspection and willingness to look at what's underground and to maintain it when it needs maintaining. Rome has the engineering capacity to solve it. Rome is solving harder engineering problems right now. There are aqueducts under construction that will bring water to neighbourhoods currently served by the old degrading connections. There are sewer expansion projects in discussion. The resources exist. The knowledge exists. What doesn't yet exist quite is the chain of proof that connects the fuller's drainage to the street fountain to the 41 cases on Gaius's map, in a form that an aedile who is not already persuaded will find persuasive. That's what you're building, case by case, data point by data point. You stand up from the bench. You wash your hands in the cleaning channel carefully, the way Gaius taught you, between the fingers, around the thumbs, up to the wrist. You dry them on the rough cloth you carry for this purpose. You walk back to the Argoletum. You work. In the evenings, sometimes, not always, you walk to the cloaca. Not to the inspection grate near the fuller's, though you know where that is now with the proprietary knowledge of someone who has mapped a thing. To the other end. To the Tiber. There is an arch where the cloaca meets the river. Cut into the embankment in the old stone of the city's first centuries, dark with 600 years of what it carries. The arch is perhaps 8 feet across and 10 feet tall, large enough to drive a small cart through, as Gaius said, and the stones at its edges are smooth where hands have touched them across 6 centuries. The city's output, constant and patient, flowing into the river. You stand here and you think about the mathematics of it. 1 million people, every day, every body doing what bodies do, every chamber pot carried down every flight of stairs in every insula in the city, every public latrina, every private latrina in the wealthy houses, every street corner emergency, all of it eventually ending up here. The Romans called the goddess of the sewer Cloacina, Venus Cloacina, the cleansing Venus. They built her a shrine in the Forum, over the spot where the first drain was dug in the city's early centuries. They prayed to her. You understand this standing at the arch. Not the theology, you're not especially religious, but the impulse, the acknowledgement that this, the flowing away of what must flow away, the maintenance of the channel that makes the city possible, is sacred in the functional sense, is the thing that everything else depends on. Without the cloaca, Rome cannot exist. The baths and the forums and the temples and the commerce and the million lives being lived on the hills above, all of it is downstream of the cloaca, in the sense that the cloaca is the condition that makes all of it possible. The sewer is the foundation, not of the buildings, of the life. The water flows, dark and steady, under the arch and into the Tiber and downriver to the sea. Somewhere upstream in the apartment buildings and the workshops and the latrines, the city is producing what it produces, and here at the arch it leaves. Between these two moments, the production and the departure is the city, its engineering and its improvisation, its sanitation successes and its failures, its sponges in saltwater buckets, and its maps on papyrus and its letters to the aqueduct office that go into a box along with the previous three. You stay for a while, then you walk back through the city's winter dark. Let me tell you what happens next, across the centuries, because you won't be there to see it and I'll want you to know. The Roman system continues for several hundred years. It works well when it's maintained and badly when it isn't, which is most of the time in most places, because maintenance requires sustained attention and sustained funding, and these are the things that tend to fail first when a civilization is under pressure. The late empire, stretched thin across too much territory, maintains the aqueducts less and the sewers less and the public latrine less, and the illness rates in the cities rise, and by the time the Western Roman Empire stops being a Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, many of the cities that depended on Roman infrastructure are smaller and sicker than they were at Rome's peak. The Cloaca Maxima continues to function. It is still functional today. This is a fact that should give you some combination of awe and pause. In the medieval period, the centuries after Rome, European cities improvise. The stone Roman sewer, where it exists, is still used but not maintained. New cities built outside Rome's infrastructure zone develop their own systems. Open channels in the middle of the street, the cloaca in the street rather than under it, that drain toward the river or the city wall. Chamber pots emptied from windows with the warning cry that became, in French, the phrase that everyone who has read a certain kind of history book knows: Gardez l'eau. Watch out for the water. The name of the thing the water is emphatically not. Cities in this period are small, not for lack of ambition, but for lack of sanitation capacity. You can only concentrate as many people in one place as your waste management system can support. The ceiling on medieval European cities is relatively low, and it's set partly by plague and partly by war, and partly by the simple mathematics of what happens when more people than a system can handle try to live in one place. The water and the waste keep meeting each other. This is the history of cities until someone draws the map with enough cases marked on it to change the calculation. In the 11th century, crusaders returning from the Islamic world bring back, among other things, some observations about Islamic hygienic practice. The hammam, the Turkish bath, begins to spread into European culture, adapting the Roman bath concept but with more explicit attention to the hygiene protocols that Islamic law requires. The principle of cleaning water over the washing basin, replacing used water with fresh, rather than immersing in a shared pool, represents a step forward in contamination prevention that the Roman bath, for all its engineering excellence, didn't quite achieve. In the 12th and 13th centuries, in the cities of the Islamic world, Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, population densities are higher than comparable European cities, and illness rates are, in some diseases, lower. This is not accident. It is the left hand and the water, institutionalized across generations into an almost automatic practice, doing its quiet work. Paper, meanwhile, is spreading west from China. The knowledge of paper making, how to process plant fibre into thin, flat sheets, travels from China along the Silk Road. By the 8th century, Arab craftsmen in Samarkand have paper mills. By the 9th century, Baghdad is the centre of paper production in the Islamic world. By the 13th century, paper mills are in Italy and Spain. But the connection, the specific insight that cheap paper, used once and discarded, could replace the Roman sponge or the Greek stone or the moss from the riverbank, this connection is slow to make. Paper in medieval Europe is still relatively valuable, made from linen rags, which are a limited resource. Using paper this way would be waste. Old documents, yes. Almanac pages, yes. The margins of books that were no longer needed, the edges of printed sheets. These things are used, in informal ways, across medieval Europe. But systematic production of paper specifically designed for this purpose, that comes later. Joseph Gaiety, New York, 1857. Medicated paper for the water closet, 50 sheets per package. His name printed on each one, $2 for 500 sheets. He is not the first to have the idea. He's the first to make it commercial at scale, to treat the product as a product rather than a convenience or a waste material application. Seth Wheeler patents the perforated roll in 1891. He patents the holder. He patents the cardboard core. The argument about whether the paper hangs over the top of the roll or under the bottom begins at some point in the early 20th century and continues without resolution to the present moment, though Wheeler's original patent diagrams show it hanging over. By the 20th century, manufactured toilet paper is so cheap and so available in the developed world that it has become effectively invisible, a background condition of life as taken for granted as the water from the tap and the light from the switch, one of those things that people never think about until it isn't there. In 2020, a pandemic removed supply from store shelves in dozens of countries for a period of several weeks, and an entire generation of people who had never thought about it suddenly think about it quite intensely. This too is history. Every moment when the solution fails, people find out what the solution was doing. You, standing at the arch over the Tiber on a December evening in year 72, understanding for the first time the size of what the cloaca carries, you are in the same position as every other human being who has ever been forced by circumstance to think about the thing they usually don't think about. The answer to your question about what to do when the solution fails is, make a better one. Find the map and mark the cases and write the letters and knock on the neighbours' doors and eat Quintus's bread and accumulate the data that will eventually build the proof. It takes longer than you want. It always takes longer than you want. But someone has to start. You turn away from the arch. You walk back through Rome. The evening smells of cooking fires and the river and the cold that's coming down from the north. And underneath all of it, If you breathe slowly, if you pay attention, if you've learned what Gaius has been teaching you, the specific background smell of a city that is managing its own existence as well as it knows how to manage it with the tools it has in the time it has for the people who are in it. It is not perfect management. It never is. But the city is still standing after 3,000 years of this hill and this river. The city is still standing. You suppose that counts for something. December settles around you like a second cloak. You go home. Spring comes to Rome the way it comes to every Mediterranean city, sudden and complete, the way a lamp is lit, not gradually, but in a moment when the light changes and the smell of the air changes and everything that was cold becomes warm before you've quite adjusted to the transition. You notice it first through the smell. March morning, and the smell of the city is different. The coal fires that have burned through the winter are going out or going lower, and the smell of the cold stone of the city, the particular mineral smell of Rome's buildings when the temperature drops, this smell is gone, replaced by something looser and more complex and, on balance, better. The smell of the city warming up, opening up, the walls releasing stored winter and beginning to absorb the new season. The fuller's workshop has been going all winter. It doesn't stop for cold. If anything, the winter slows the process slightly. The chemical reaction in the vats is more efficient at higher temperatures, but they compensate with longer stomping time, and you've heard the rhythmic thumping through the coldest mornings without pause. They don't stop for floods. They don't stop for snow when Rome occasionally gets it, which is rarely and briefly but does happen. They stop for the festivals only, and not for all of them. You've become, over this winter, something like a regular feature of the fuller's exterior. You've been by often enough, following up on the drainage question, mapping the outflow from the workshop in different weather conditions, observing after floods and after dry spells and after the kind of sustained cold rain that soaks the city's stone and finds its way into everything below the surface, that the workshop owner knows you now. He still regards you with mild suspicion, but he's given up actively discouraging your presence. "The physician's boy," he said to someone last week in a tone that wasn't entirely unfriendly. "The one who's measuring my drain. Gaius has received a 5th letter from the aqueduct office. The 5th letter is different from the previous 4. The 5th letter requests a meeting. He reads it twice. He folds it. He puts it on his desk and leaves it there while he sees 3 patients and writes 2 records and grinds a batch of the willow bark preparation that we're going through at an accelerating rate as the winter joint complaints mount. After the 3rd patient, he comes to the back room where you're grinding. The aqueduct office wants to meet, he says. I saw. Next week. Good." He's quiet for a moment, looking at the shelves, the careful organisation of the preparations, the systematic ordering of what's here. "I don't know what changed," he says. "Maybe the 4th letter. Maybe the number of cases after the November flood. Maybe someone in the office got sick. Maybe..." He picks up the letter, looks at it again. "Or maybe there's been internal pressure about the infrastructure in that section from the engineering side, and our letters gave someone else an argument they wanted to make. Does it matter why?" He sets the letter down. "No," he says. "It matters that it's happening." The meeting is, as it turns out, better than either of you expected. The aqueduct office official is a careful man named Marcus Scribonius, perhaps 45, with a particular combination of engineering knowledge and administrative caution that you associate with people who've spent their careers managing large infrastructure on behalf of governments that want the infrastructure managed and don't want to hear about problems with it. He's heard about problems with it. He's been hearing about problems with the Subura district connections for some time from his own engineers. The issue is funding and prioritization. There are 47 sections of the city's water distribution network that need some degree of remediation, and the Subura section is not the most urgent in terms of total volume served, and it has been below the threshold of what gets funded in any given year. But the illness data, specifically the spike after the November flood, specifically the spatial distribution that corresponds to the hypothesized contamination path, this has shifted the calculation, not because the Aqueduct Office suddenly cares more about Subura residents than it did 6 months ago, because the illness data represents a risk of the problem spreading. The Subura is adjacent to the Fullers district, which is adjacent to the Argulitum, which is adjacent to the Forum. If the contamination is what Gaius thinks it is, and if the next flood is more severe than November's, the spread pattern might reach neighbourhoods that are not populated primarily by freedmen and day labourers and immigrant apprentices. This is what Gaius said on the walk over. They're not going to fix it for the Subura. They're going to fix it before it stops being a Subura problem. He said this without bitterness. It was just information. The meeting lasts 2 hours. The Aqueduct Office agrees to send an underground inspection team to the section in question within the month. They agree to share the inspection maps with Gaius when completed. They agree to report back on the condition of both the sewer line and the water supply line in the relevant section. No commitment to remediation yet, no funding authorised, but an inspection agreed. You walk back to the shop in the pale March light with Gaius moving beside you slightly differently than usual. Not faster, not slower, but lighter in some way. The way a person moves when they've set something down they've been carrying for a long time and haven't quite realised yet that they're no longer carrying it. 4 years, you say. 4 years and 5 months. For an inspection agreement. For a first inspection agreement, the remediation may take another 4 years, if it happens at all. He walks in silence for a moment, but the evidence is on record now. With the Aqueduct Office, it cannot be unmade. Is that enough? He looks at you with the careful assessment look he uses when he's about to say something he considers important. It's more than I had yesterday, he says. More than I had 4 years ago. It is, in itself, not enough, but each step that is enough for its moment makes the next step possible. He looks forward again. The Cloaca Maxima was not built in a season. It was built over generations, each generation extending what the previous one left. You walk in silence. You should start your own records, he says. I already am. I mean formally. A systematic record designed to continue beyond the current project. If I'm not here. Don't. I'm 56 years old, and I walk through flooded streets several times a year, and I eat at Roman cookshops, he says. I'm not being morbid, I'm being practical. If the records don't outlast me, the 4 years and 5 months of letters end when I end. I want them to continue. You walk. All right, you say. Good. He pauses. The formal structure, each case mapped to a street address and a water source, dated with the illness profile noted. Standard grid referencing for location, consistent with the Aqueduct Office's own mapping system, so that the data can be directly compared. I'll show you the format. I'll do it tonight. Tomorrow is fine. He stops walking. You've arrived at the shop. Today we have 3 afternoon patients and I need to restock the mint compound, and there's a letter to write to the guild about the winter membership report. He opens the door. And you look hungry. I am hungry. Quintus sent over a loaf this morning. Take half. You take half. The bread is very good. You eat it standing in the preparation room the way Romans eat most things. Standing, moving, folding the food into the time available rather than stopping for it. You think about the inspection team going underground in the Subura next month, about the maps they'll come back with, about the condition of 60-year-old clay pipes in soil that floods twice a year. You think about Gaius's records, now formally in the aqueduct office's possession, about the evidence that exists and cannot be unmade. You think about the woman with the 3-year-old who came in November, about whether she found out what water to use, about whether the 3-year-old is still well. You think about the man reading his scroll in the public latrina, about the 7 data points Quintus assembled from his neighbours, about 41 cases mapped in a specific distribution around a specific hypothesis about a specific infrastructure failure that the aqueduct office has now agreed to inspect. All of this is what it is. Small, slow, incremental. The daily operation of a very modest outpost of the enormous machinery of keeping 1 million people alive. But it is also what it has always been, in every city, in every era. The specific person in the specific place doing the specific small work that the large work is made of. You eat your bread, you go back to the grinding, months pass, the inspection team goes underground in April. They come back with maps. The maps show what Gaius suspected. At 3 points along the relevant stretch, the sewer line and the water supply pipe are closer than the original specifications, and in one location, the section that runs under the fuller's workshop courtyard, the distance is approximately 4 feet, and the sewer line has a crack at that location visible to the inspector, who went down with a lamp, a crack that has been leaking into the surrounding soil with unknown volume and unknown duration. The funding for remediation is approved in May. The work begins in June. You see it when you walk past one morning. The street torn up, the stone pavers carefully stacked to one side, the hole in the earth where the engineers have gone down to where the pipes are. Slaves working with picks and shovels, the stench rising from the opened earth that makes even the experienced construction crew keep their mouths closed. A supervisor standing above the hole with his arms crossed watching. You stop. How bad? You ask. He looks at you, takes in the leather case, the physician's apprentice's posture. The physician who reported this, he asks. His apprentice, he nods. 4-foot gap where it should be 12. The sewer wall. He makes a gesture that is eloquent about the sewer wall's condition. It's been leaking into the surrounding soil for, we don't know, years, maybe more than years. How many people live in the adjacent blocks? Couple thousand, maybe 3. 3,000 people. Over how many years? Drinking water from a supply that ran within 4 feet of a leaking sewer wall. We're replacing a 60-foot section, the supervisor says. New pipe, new clearance specifications. The water supply pipe in the same section is showing some degradation too, though it's intact. We're assessing whether to replace it in the same operation. It should be replaced. I know it should. He looks at you with the expression of a man who has opinions about things that aren't fully in his authority. The engineers are recommending it. Whether the funding gets approved for the additional work, he shrugs. Above my level. Write it in your report, you say. That it should be replaced. Make it specific. My master is compiling records that correlate the condition of this section with illness rates in the surrounding neighbourhoods over 4 years. If the water supply pipe's condition is documented, those records will become more useful. He looks at you more carefully. The physician's been tracking this for 4 years, 4.5. And it took that long? Yes. He looks at the hole, at the workers, at the street torn up around him. The water pipe goes in the report, he says. Thank you. You walk on. You want to run back and tell Gaius. You also want to stand there for a while and look at the opened earth, at the pipes exposed to daylight for the first time in 60 years, at the evidence made physical and present of what you've been mapping in marks on papyrus for 4.5 years. You compromise. You walk at rates slightly faster than your normal pace, and when you arrive at the shop you say, the crack in the sewer pipe is confirmed. 4-foot gap, they're replacing 60 feet of line, and I may have convinced the supervisor to recommend replacing the water supply pipe in the same section. You say all this in one breath, and Gaius listens to all of it with the expression of a man receiving information he's been working toward for a very long time. He sits down, which is not something he does in the middle of the workday. He sits at his desk and he puts his hands flat on the surface in front of him, and he is quiet for a moment. Good, he says. Just that. Good. But it means what it means, and you both know what it means. Summer arrives. The street in the Subura where the pipes were is repaired. The stone pavers replaced, the earth tamped down, the new pipes invisible underground doing their work. The street looks exactly the same as it did before. There's no monument, no marker, nothing visible to indicate that something has changed under the surface. The illness reports from that district that summer are lower than any previous year in Gaius's records. Not absent. You can't eliminate all transmission through one infrastructure repair. The shared sponge is still in the latrina. People still use the street fountain because some of them don't know about the repair, and some of them don't understand the connection, and some of them simply don't think about it. There are other water sources in the Subura with other potential problems, other contamination paths not yet mapped, but lower, measurably lower. You sit with Gaius on an August evening, the summer heat finally tolerable because the light is angled now, late afternoon light rather than midday vertical heat. The shop shutters open to admit whatever air is moving through the argulitum. 17 cases this summer in the relevant streets, he says, against 41 last year. The repair, probably the repair, and the dry summer, less subsurface water movement means less contamination spread even in the remaining problem areas. But adjusting for weather, the reduction is still significant. He sets down the tablet. I'm writing a formal medical report, to be submitted to the medical guild and through them to the city records. They'll publish it. They'll file it, which means it exists in the record, which means in 20 years when someone else wants to make the same argument about a different section of the water supply, they'll have our data to build on. And the guild? The guild is cautious, they always are. But there are 3 physicians in the guild who've been doing similar observation-based work in different districts, and I've been corresponding with all of them for years. He picks up the tablet again. We're building something, Lucius. It takes time. It's built from small data and slow accumulation and patience that most people don't have. But it's being built. It's being built. The summer evening settles around you. Somewhere in the city, the cloaca does its patient work. The aqueducts bring their mountain water down through the hills. The public latrines serve their 1,000 daily users. The chamber pots wait in the corners of the insular rooms to be carried down in the morning. The city maintains itself, imperfectly, inadequately, with gaps and failures and the constant negotiation between what the infrastructure can deliver and what 1 million people require. But it maintains itself, and in a shop on the Argoletum in August of the year 72, or 73 now, you've crossed the new year, a physician and his apprentice have made one small section of the system work better than it did. That is the work. Evening, you walk home. The streets of Rome in August at this hour have a quality that you've been here long enough to know well and to love, in the way you've come to love most things about this city that you initially survived rather than chose. Warm stone releasing the day's stored heat. The cooking fires of 1,000 households visible as faint light behind shutters. The sound of the city in its evening mode, lower and more human than the day's commercial cacophony, more domestic, closer to whatever lives inside the noise. You pass the fuller's workshop. Closed for the evening, the big doors shut, the smell of the place perceptible but contained. The collection barrel is visible at the end of the alley. The barrel you've been carrying chamber pots to for a year now. The barrel that connected to the vats, that connected to the drain, that connected to the sewer, that had the crack in it that leaked into the soil that was near the water pipe that supplied the fountain that the woman's 3-year-old drank from. All of it visible from where you stand. You go upstairs. The room smells of evening. Titus is out. Marcus is sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, reading something in the lamplight, a scroll he's borrowed from somewhere, the kind of thing he's been doing more often lately, studying in the evenings, the sign of someone who is beginning to want something more than a rival. "Good day," he asks. "Good day," you say. He hears something in your voice, the small particular satisfaction of someone who has accomplished something measured and real, even if the measure is invisible in the realities underground. The pipe repair, they confirm the crack. It's fixed. You sit on the edge of the mattress. 17 cases this summer compared to 41 last year. He's quiet for a moment. 24 people didn't get sick this summer who would have, he says. Approximately. Some of them might have gotten sick anyway from other causes, and some will get sick later if there are other contamination paths we haven't identified. But approximately. That's not a small thing. No, you agree, it's not. He goes back to his scroll. You take out your tablet, your own record, the one that is now being copied, section by section, into the formal format Gaius has designed, the format that will make it usable by whoever comes after. You open to today's entry. You write. The pipe section in the Subura is repaired. The summer data shows a reduction in illness that is consistent with the hypothesis, though not conclusive proof of it. The formal report is being written. The records will be submitted to the Guild archive. You write, 24 people, approximately, who would have been sick. Approximately 24 people who this summer were not. You write, this is not the end. There are other sections, other contamination paths not yet mapped, other water sources with unknown problems, other Phalonica workshops with drainage that needs assessment. The work that was done here needs to be done in 100 other places in this city, and in 100 other cities in the Empire, and in every city in the world, where people live close together, and where the water that sustains them flows near the waste that they must remove. You write, but this section is done. This year's summer, these 24 people. You close the tablet. The lamp gutters slightly in a draught from the shutters. Marcus has fallen asleep over his scroll, which has happened before and which you're careful not to mention to him, because he values the idea of himself reading late into the evening, and the reality of himself falling asleep after 2 pages. You take the scroll from his limp hand and set it aside carefully. You blow out the lamp. The room goes dark, and Rome speaks through the dark in its nighttime voice. The cartwheels, lower and more intermittent now, but never fully absent. The sound of the city at the hour when most people are sleeping and the people who are not are moving goods, moving quietly, moving in the dark. The cloaca under the streets, doing its perpetual work. The aqueducts bringing their mountain water down from 50 miles away through the night, so that in the morning when you carry your chamber pot down the stairs and rinse it at the barrel, and come back up and wash your face in the basin, the water will be there, clean and cold from the mountain springs. You lie down. The straw mattress, which seemed impossible to sleep on in your first weeks in this city, and which now feels like the specific right texture of what a mattress should be, because what a mattress should be has become, for you, whatever this is. You close your eyes. The sounds of Rome, the cloaca and the aqueducts and the cartwheels and the sleeping city, the smell of the room, familiar now, completely familiar, the specific compound of this building and these people, and this particular corner of this particular city. Home. It became that without you noticing. Somewhere between the first morning with the chamber pot and the day you mapped your 37th case. Somewhere between the flood of November and the pipe repair of June. Somewhere between the letter that went into the box with the other letters and the meeting at the aqueduct office that changed something small and permanent about the quality of the water in the Subura district. Somewhere in all of that, this city stopped being a place you were surviving and became the place you were living. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, by Rome's standards, which are their own standards, and which you have, over a year and some months, made your own. You have work that matters, a master who teaches you, records that are building toward something real. That is more than enough. The lamp is out. The city speaks its nighttime language. You are part of the cloaca, in a way. In the way that everyone who has ever lived in a city is part of the cloaca. Part of the system that takes what bodies produce and moves it away, that maintains the distance between the waste and the water, that keeps the channels open so that the life above them can continue. You didn't choose this work. You came to Rome to be a physician's apprentice, and you discovered that being a physician's apprentice in this city meant understanding the city as a body, and understanding the city as a body meant understanding the systems that keep it alive. And the most fundamental of those systems is the one that nobody discusses at dinner and everyone depends on every morning. But now you've seen it. Now you know where the pipe is and where the crack was and what was in the soil around it and how many people drank from the fountain nearby. You know the cloaca. You've stood at its mouth. You've tracked its failures. And you've made one piece of it better. The sounds soften. Not gone. Rome is never gone, but receding from the foreground of your attention, moving to the background where they've always been, the constant murmur that you've learned to sleep through, the way you've learned to sleep on straw, the way you've learned to navigate the flood, the way you've learned to read a map on papyrus and write a record and carry a chamber pot down 6 flights of stairs without waking the people who are sleeping. You have learned this city. It has learned you. Sleep comes the way the evening cools, gradually with intention, the body deciding that it has done what it needed to do today, and that consciousness is no longer the priority. You think, tomorrow there will be patience, there will be the morning compound to grind, there will be the records to update, the formal system, the careful work of accumulation. But that is tomorrow. Tonight there is just this. The city that was here before you and will be hereafter, doing its patient work under the streets and through the pipes and in the channels that move what needs to be moved so that 1 million people can sleep. The cloaca flows, the aqueducts run, the pipes that were cracked are sealed. The water is clean in one section that it was not clean in before. 24 people, approximately, who did not get sick, who got to keep their ordinary lives, their bread and their work and their evenings and their chamber pots and their families, because someone kept the records and wrote the letters and made the map and knocked on the neighbours' doors and ate the baker's bread and did not stop. You did not stop. Let that be what you carry into sleep. Let the cloaca carry everything else. Let it go where it goes, downstream, to the river, to the sea. Let the water come in clean from the mountains. Let the city breathe. Let sleep take you the way water takes a channel, following the shape that's already there, filling it quietly with no drama, with the absolute patience of water finding its level. You're tired. You have earned this. The sounds of Rome are the sounds of a place that has been here for a very long time and has managed, imperfectly and inadequately and with constant effort and occasional success, to keep going. You are part of that management. Not a large part, not a famous part, a small part, in a small shop on a small street in the largest city in the world. But the small parts matter. The small parts are what the large parts are made of. Centuries will pass. The Rome you know, its insulae and its Follonica and its latrini and its collection barrels and its chamber pots and its running water under the stone benches, all of this will go. The buildings will come down. The streets will be buried under new streets. The pipes will be replaced by better pipes, and those pipes by better ones still, until the solution has changed so completely that someone hearing about it for the first time will think it must be talking about a different problem entirely. The sponge on the stick will become a memory, a historical curiosity, something described in books and replicated in museum displays and mentioned in history podcasts by people who cannot quite believe it was real. It was real. The man reading his scroll on the stone bench was real. The woman with the 3-year-old was real. The crack in the pipe 4 feet from the water supply was real. All of it as real as the straw mattress under you and the Rome sounds outside and the year you've spent learning where things go and why it matters where they go. People will still live in cities, still carry water to their buildings by different means, still produce what bodies produce and need it moved away by different systems, still make the calculation generation after generation of what the infrastructure costs against what the illness costs, and still, sometimes, get the calculation right. Some things don't change. The city doesn't change. Not fundamentally. 1 million people needing water and needing waste removal and needing the 2 things kept separate. This doesn't change. The specific solution changes. The technology changes, the materials change, but the problem stays constant and the need to solve it stays constant, and somewhere in every city, in every century, there is a physician with a map on his desk making marks on it, and a physician's apprentice who learned to carry the marks forward. They are still out there, somewhere, in every city, still mapping, still building the evidence, still taking care of what needs to be taken care of. The sounds of Rome soften. The lamp is out. The cloaca flows. You close your eyes. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way water takes a wall that finally gives, not with violence, but with patience, with the accumulated weight of time. The soft, inevitable dissolution of the boundary between being awake and being gone. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are safe enough. The records are written. The map is made. The pipe is fixed. 24 people are sleeping tonight in houses they'll wake up in tomorrow, healthy, without knowing why, without knowing that someone sat in a cold room counting marks on a map, until the marks made a shape and the shape made an argument, and the argument made a meeting, and the meeting made an inspection, and the inspection made a repair, without knowing that's how cities work, that this is always how cities work. Someone counts, someone maps, someone doesn't stop, someone doesn't stop. Sleep now. The city will be here when you wake up. It was here before you. It will be here after. And so, for a little while longer will you. Good night. There is a market near the base of the Capitoline Hill that operates every morning except festival days, and that has been operating in one form or another on this same ground for longer than anyone can precisely account for. This is where you go on the mornings when Gaius sends you for supplies, certain dried herbs that don't keep well when prepared in advance, fresh things that need to be purchased the same day they're used, the occasional ceramic vessel when one breaks in the preparation room. The market exists at the intersection of everything that makes Rome what it is. On your left, a vendor of dried herbs from every province of the empire, saffron from Cilicia in small clay jars sealed with wax, worth more per weight than silver, pepper from the eastern trade routes, the import that has so thoroughly changed Roman cooking in the past century that people now discuss what meals were like before it, with the slight incomprehension of people who have grown up with something and cannot quite imagine its absence. Thyme and rosemary and sage from the hills, locally grown, cheap and abundant. Silphium, or rather the substitute for silphium, because the real silphium, the great flavouring herb from Cyrenaica, is now effectively extinct from over-harvesting, another item on the long list of things Rome has used up faster than the earth could restore them. On your right, the fish stalls. Rome is 90 miles from the sea, but you would not know it from the fish market, which achieves a freshness through the empire's transport network. Fast horses, proper ice from the mountain winters, the application of considerable organisational intelligence to the problem of moving perishable goods from coast to city. That still impresses you after a year. That still makes you think of Puteoli and the harbour and the boats coming in, and the smell of fish that was never this cosmopolitan, never this variety of species from this variety of waters. But that was fresher than even this, fresh as the morning sea. In the middle of the market, the vegetable sellers, the brassicas that are Rome's staple, the cabbage and the turnip and the radish, cheap and available and reliable across every season, the onions and the garlic that go into everything, the herbs that aren't medicine but also aren't entirely not medicine. The line between seasoning and treatment in Roman thought is considerably less defined than modern categories would suggest. And at the far edge, the water sellers. You've noticed them before, but not stopped to think about them carefully. They sell water, fresh, clean water, carried in amphorae from the mountain spring sources, sold by the cup or the amphora to people who either don't trust the street fountains or are willing to pay for the certainty of source. The price is not trivial. An amphora of spring water from the better sellers costs 4 asses, not enormous, but enough that a day labourer doesn't buy it. The people buying it are middling sorts, shopkeepers, successful craftsmen, the better-off class of freedmen who can afford to pay a small premium for certainty about their water. This is, you've realised, a kind of private solution to the public problem that Gaius is trying to fix through public means. The poor use the street fountains whose supply is uncertain. The rich have aqueduct connections directly to their houses. The best connections, the Aqua Marcia and the Aqua Claudia, the mountain springs that are clean and cold year-round. The middle sort, who can't afford the direct connections buy spring water from the water sellers when they're worried, which means the people who are most at risk from contaminated public water, the people who use the street fountains because it's what they have, are also the people who can least afford the alternative. You buy what Gaia sent you for. You note the water sellers' prices. You note which neighbourhoods have the highest concentration of water sellers, which you'd expect to correlate with the neighbourhoods where the public supply is worst, and make a mental note to check this against the map. Then you walk through the forum. The forum at mid-morning is at its most operationally intense. Every piece of ground is in use. The advocates moving between the law courts, clients trailing behind advocates, money changers at their tables, merchants who conduct their business here because the foot traffic is good and the visibility is better, the religious participants in whatever festival of whatever deity is being honoured today, moving through toward the temples with the portable altars and the incense that adds its specific note to the morning's compound of smells. Above it all, the temples, the enormous temples, Saturnus, Jupiter, Castor and Pollux, the round Vesta with her eternal flame, each one representing a deal Rome believes it has made with the universe. The universe will continue to function in ways beneficial to Rome if Rome performs the correct rituals in the correct buildings at the correct times. This is not so different, you've come to think, from Gaius's maps. The map is also a deal. If we perform the correct actions, identify the contamination source, fix the pipe, monitor the illness rates, then the universe, in this case the population of the Subura district, will function in ways more beneficial to its inhabitants than before. Both the temple and the map are humans making arguments about the relationship between their actions and the outcomes they want. Both are built on accumulated observation, the priests observing which rituals correlate with favourable outcomes, the physician observing which water sources correlate with illness. Both require maintenance. The rituals must be performed correctly and regularly. The pipes must be inspected and repaired. The difference, maybe, is in the specificity of the mechanism. The priest knows that the ritual must be performed, but not why it works. Gaius suspects what the mechanism is and is trying to prove it. You stand in the forum and you think about this, and then a senator's litter bearers nearly knock you over because you've stopped moving in the middle of a crowd, which is not something you should do. You move. You pass the shrine of Venus Cloacina. It's small, a circular enclosure perhaps 10 feet across, with a low wall and 2 statues inside, standing on the ancient bronze cover of what is said to be the original drain from which the Cloaca Maxima grew. The 2 statues represent Venus, and according to some, the Sabine women who were reconciled with the Roman men who abducted them near this spot in the city's legendary founding stories. Venus Cloacina, the cleansing Venus, the Venus of the sewer, has been worshipped here since before Rome was a republic. The statues are nothing remarkable. Many better executed statues stand in better situated shrines within 100 yards. But people stop. Not always, not everyone, but regularly throughout the day people stop at this enclosure and make the small gesture of acknowledgement, hand to lips, a murmured word, nothing elaborate. That is the Roman way of passing a shrine whose deity has some relevance to your life, which you suppose for everyone who has ever lived in this city this one does. You stop. You make the gesture. You don't say a prayer exactly. You're not sure what you believe about the gods, and Gaius maintains that what the gods believe about us is not a medical question, but you acknowledge the thing the shrine acknowledges, that the water flowing underground, the waste being moved through the cloaca, the system that keeps the city's million lives from collapsing into one enormous public health catastrophe, this is not nothing. This is, in its way, sacred. Sacred in the sense that it is the condition for everything else, the prior condition, the thing without which nothing works. You move on. The morning continues. At the shop there are 2 patients waiting. The first is a new patient, a woman from the building adjacent to the fuller's workshop who has heard about Gaius from her neighbour and who has a stomach complaint that began 3 days ago. He takes her through the standard questions. You write. He makes his internal mark, the one you've learned to recognise. Water source, proximity to potential contamination, illness profile. He gives her the stomach compound and the instructions for the water. He adds her to the map. The second patient is the elderly man with the chest complaint, the one who wheezes, the one Gaius said sounds like a wet sail in a dead wind. He comes every 3 weeks. He is 81 years old, which is an age that Romans consider remarkable, and that Gaius considers medically interesting. He has been wheezing for 30 years. He has survived things, Gaius has told you some of them, that should statistically have killed him. He seems to regard his continued survival as a minor administrative error by the fates, one that he is in no hurry to bring to anyone's attention. Still here, he says, settling into the chair. I can see that, Gaius says. Breathing's worse than last time. Yes, this summer damp. It usually improves in autumn. That's what you said last year. That's what the evidence suggested last year. It was correct. The old man considers this. Will you be here in 10 years? He asks. I don't know, Gaius says, with the honesty that is one of his most distinctive qualities. Neither do I, the old man says. Better keep coming then, while we've both got the option. He laughs. He coughs. He laughs again. Gaius adjusts the chest preparation. You write the case. The old man leaves. He was a physician too, Gaius says, after he's gone. I didn't know that. Retired 20 years ago. Too many patients, he said. He wanted to walk in the mornings. He organises the day's tablets. He's been walking in the mornings for 20 years and still has the worst chest in the Argoletum district. Maybe the walking helps. Maybe. Or maybe he'd be worse without it. It's difficult to determine the counterfactual. You think about counterfactuals, about the 24 people who didn't get sick this summer, about the counterfactual in which the pipe is never inspected, the crack is never found, the water continues to carry what it carries to the fountain that the woman's 3-year-old drinks from, about what that counterfactual looks like in 5 years, in 10, in the 20 years the old physician has been walking his mornings. You prefer the map to the counterfactual. You go back to the preparation room, the mortar and pestle, the dried herbs, the smell of things being ground, thyme and rosemary and the willow bark and the compound that Gaius has been refining for 2 years for the specific stomach illness profile, the one that you have now administered to 48 patients and tracked through their recovery, adding their outcomes to the record that will eventually become the evidence for or against the compound's efficacy. Everything measured, everything recorded, everything added to the accumulation. This is how knowledge grows in medicine. And this is, you've come to believe, how knowledge grows everywhere that matters. Not in dramatic revelations, not in sudden insights that change everything overnight. Those exist too, but they're rare and they're downstream of 1,000 smaller accumulations that made them possible. Knowledge grows in the grinding and the recording, and the letter that goes into the box and the letter that goes into another box, and the meeting that happens 4 years later that produces an agreement to send a team underground to look at a 60-year-old pipe. 4.5 years for one pipe repair. You grind. You note that the thyme is particularly fresh this week. You can tell by the smell, which is sharper and more volatile than last week's batch, which sat in the storage jar a little long before you used it. Gaius has taught you to sort herbs by smell as a first-pass quality check before you process them. The ones that have lost their volatile compounds through age or bad storage aren't worthless, but they're less potent, and the dosing for the patients needs to account for that. A preparation made from aged herbs needs more material to achieve the same therapeutic effect. This seems like a small thing. It is a small thing, but multiplied across every preparation, every patient, every day. The small things are what the large thing is made of. You grind. Outside, Rome continues being Rome. The fuller's workshop starts its afternoon session. You've learned the timing of the shifts there, the way the thumping rhythm changes as one set of workers is relieved and another takes over, the slight increase in the smell that comes with fresh material added to the vats. You can track the fuller's schedule by smell now, which is a skill you did not expect to develop and which you're slightly uncertain about sharing with anyone who didn't specifically need to know it. The street vendors do their midday calls, a water carrier's voice, distinctive. Fresh water, clean water, mountain water, who wants clean water? You always know which streets the water carriers can be found on. You've been on those streets enough times, tracking the data points for the map, that you know which neighbourhoods have the highest density of private water sales, and which have the highest density of street fountain use, and which have the highest illness rates, and how these three sets of data overlap and where they don't. The water carriers exist at the intersection of public failure and private market. The public water supply should be sufficient. In the good sections of the city, the well-maintained sections, the sections whose residents have the political leverage to demand proper maintenance, it largely is. In the sections where it isn't, the water carrier fills the gap for a price, and the people who most need clean water, who are most at risk from contaminated public water, because their immune systems have less reserve, because their nutrition is worse, because they live in more crowded conditions where illness spreads faster, those people are the least able to afford the water carrier. This is the fundamental injustice of infrastructure, not malice. Just the way that systems tilt toward the people who maintain them, toward the people who have leverage over the decisions about them. Gaius said this. He was right. You put down the pestle. You take out your tablet. You write. A city that relies on private water carriers to fill the gaps in its public water supply is a city that has decided, without deciding, that the quality of its water is a function of the ability to pay. The people who cannot pay drink the water that cannot be trusted. This is not inevitable. It is a choice that looks like a circumstance because the choice was made so long ago, or so quietly that no one now remembers making it. You write, the pipe repair in the Subura improves the water quality for 3,000 people who cannot pay the water carrier. It improves it, because someone counted the cases and made the maps and did not stop. The cost of the repair, spread across 3,000 people, is approximately 1/10 of one as per person per year. The cost of the illness in lost work and lost life and the suffering of children with stomach complaints in November is considerably higher. You write, the calculation has always been clear. The politics have always been the problem. You close the tablet. Outside, late afternoon. The quality of the light shifting from the flat midday to the angled gold of the afternoon. The shadows get in long in the narrow streets. Gaius comes in from wherever he's been. A house visit, you infer from the leather case still in his hand. He sets down the case. He looks at you. "You're thinking," he says. "I'm always thinking." "About?" "Water carriers, and who can afford them." He's quiet for a moment. "The Aqua Claudia extension project," he says. "They're planning to extend the Aqua Claudia connection to cover 3 additional neighbourhoods in the Subura district within the next 2 years. It's in the engineering office's plan." "Will it happen?" "The funding is provisionally allocated, which in Roman administrative terms means it will happen unless something happens." He sits down. Something always happens, but he stops. 2 of the 3 neighbourhoods are ones where we have significant illness data. The engineering office's decision to include them was apparently influenced by our report to the guild. You look at him. "Our report?" "The one I submitted in April, which referenced our illness data and its correlation with the water supply condition in those neighbourhoods." He picks up his stylus, sets it down. "I found out this morning. That's... You don't quite have words for it. That's 3 neighbourhoods. Perhaps 8,000 people. 8,000 people! Who will have better water because a physician made a map and a physician's apprentice knocked on Quintus the baker's door and ate good bread and wrote down what Quintus knew about his neighbours? 8,000 people. That's," you try again, "that's a lot more than 24. "Considerably more," Gaius agrees. "Though we won't know the illness reduction data for another 2 or 3 years, once the extension is built and operating. But we'll have it. We'll have it." He pauses. "You'll have it. I may not. Don't. I was going to say, I may not have your energy for the tracking by the time the data comes in. You'll be doing more of the analysis independently." He looks at you with the assessment look that has, over the year, started to feel less like evaluation and more like something else. You're ready for more of it. You don't know what to say, so you don't say anything. You take out your tablet and you add a line. 8,000 people in 3 Subura neighbourhoods, Aqua Claudia extension, planned for completion within 2 years. Then you add, downstream of the report, and then you sit for a moment and think about what it means to do something whose results you won't see for 2 or 3 years, and to trust that the results are coming because the evidence suggests they should be, because the chain of reasoning holds, because the data is real and the pipe repair worked, and the 24 cases that didn't happen are on the record. This is how you learn to live with this kind of work. Not by being there for the outcome, by being there for the accumulation. The lamp is burning low. Gaius is writing something. You go to refill the lamp. The evening settles into the shop like a familiar visitor. You grind the last batch of herbs for tomorrow's preparations. You write the final record of the day. You say goodnight to Gaius, who says goodnight to you, which is the same exchange you've had every evening for more than a year, and which has acquired in its repetition the weight of a ritual. Not large, not sacred in the temple sense, but genuine in the way of the small things you do every day that turn out to be the texture of a life. You walk home. The Subura's quieting. The street where the pipe was repaired looks exactly like every other street. You couldn't find the repair by looking at it. You'd have to know where to look, which you do, and when you stand over it, you're standing over something invisible and essential, and the product of 4.5 years of work. Invisible, essential. Both of those things at once. The city around you is full of these invisible essential things. The pipes underground, the channels carved in the stone of the latrines, directing the water, the cloaca, below your feet right now, doing its constant work. and the maps on the papyrus, and the records in the box, and the letters, 4 years and 5 months of letters that eventually built the case for looking at what was underground. You walk, you go home, you eat supper, bread from Quintus, some bean soup that Marcus made on the small brazier in the room. Not elegant, but hot and sufficient. Marcus is talking about his work. He's been moved to a different section of the fuller's operation, closer to the actual vats, which he finds interesting in a way that he's slightly embarrassed by, because finding the fuller's work interesting is not the kind of thing you're supposed to find interesting. But Marcus has always been more curious about the mechanics of things than about what people think about his curiosity. The alkaline reaction in the vats, he says. The temperature affects it. In winter, the process takes longer. In summer, it's faster, but you have to watch the material more carefully, because the heat can damage finer fabrics. You listen. You think about the alkaline reaction in the vats, and about the waste solution that goes out from those vats through the drainage and down to the sewer, and about the crack in the pipe 4 feet from the water supply. Does your workshop treat its drainage before it goes to the sewer, you ask? Marcus looks at you. What do you mean, treat it? Filter it. Let it settle in a secondary tank so the solid material settles out before the liquid enters the sewer channel. No, it goes directly. That's normal. I know it's normal. I'm asking if it should be. He thinks about this. The engineer's instinct that you've recognized in him, the one that makes him interesting about the alkaline reaction, engages with the question. If the solid material settled out first, he says, the liquid entering the sewer would be cleaner, less likely to carry. He stops. You're thinking about contamination. I'm thinking about whether the treatment practices of the workshop change the contamination risk in the sewer. That's a larger question than I can answer. I know, but you work there. You see the drainage every day. If anything changes, if they start treating it differently, or if there's a blockage, or if the drainage pattern changes, would you tell me? He looks at you with the expression of someone who has realized that living with you involves more unusual requests than he initially anticipated, and who has, over the time of living with you, made his peace with this. Yes, he says, I'll tell you. You eat your soup. The lamp burns. Late. Later than usual, because Marcus is still talking about the alkaline reaction and you're still listening, because you're genuinely interested, because this is how you've come to be in Rome. Genuinely interested in the mechanics of all of it, in the fuller's vats and the aqueduct pipes and the water carrier's route and the connection between all of these things that keeps 8,000 people from dying of bad water. Late. The city winds down outside. You wind down. Tomorrow. Patience, records, herbs, the map, the accumulation. Tonight, sleep. You lie down on the straw mattress. You close your eyes. The sounds of Rome, the cartwheels, the cloaca, the aqueducts, bringing their mountain water down through the dark. You are part of this. You are a small part of this. But the small parts are the large thing. Sleep comes. The lamp gutters. The city breathes. Good night. There is something worth understanding about what has just been described to you. And I want to say it plainly before we let the night take over completely, because it's the kind of thing that sounds abstract but is, in fact, the most concrete and physical and human thing I can think of. Every person who has ever lived, every artist whose work is in a museum, every philosopher whose words you learned in school, every emperor and every slave and every priest and every merchant and every child who grew to adulthood in any city in the history of civilization, every single one of them solved this problem every day, with whatever they had, in whatever conditions they found themselves. the xylospongium in the Roman latrina, the smooth stone the Greek philosopher carried, the left hand and the water in the Persian hammam, the corn husk in the agricultural settlement, the moss gathered from the river bank, the snow in the high alpine village, the pages torn from the old almanac, the thick-leafed plant that someone, generations ago, in some settlement along the Nile, noticed grew conveniently close to where people needed to be, and so was cultivated deliberately, carefully, with the practical intelligence of people who were paying attention. And in China, in the Han Dynasty, a century before Lucius was carrying chamber pots down 6 flights of stairs in the Subura, paper, cheap paper, light and soft and made from rags and plant fibre and the waste of the textile industry. Paper that accomplished in a single use what the Roman sponge required a bucket of salt water and the goodwill of everyone who used the same facility to accomplish. This was the right answer. Not the only possible answer. The left hand and the water is effective and hygienic when properly observed and consistently supplied with clean water. The individual stone is sound in principle. The individual wooden implement, as the Japanese refined it over centuries into the chugi, achieves a single-use hygienic standard that the shared sponge doesn't. But paper is better. Paper is obviously, irrefutably, categorically better than the alternatives that have been described in this episode. It is better in terms of hygiene, no shared transmission vector, no residue problem, no storage and maintenance requirement. It is better in terms of the dignity of the experience. It is better in terms of practicality. Available anywhere paper can be produced, which has been everywhere since the 15th century in Europe and has been everywhere in China and its sphere of influence for more than 1,000 years before that. The Western world took approximately 15 centuries after the Romans to arrive at the solution that the Chinese arrived at more or less simultaneously with the Roman period. This is not a failure of intelligence. Rome is not stupid. The engineers who built the Cloaca Maxima and the aqueducts and the hypocaust heating system under the Thermi floors are working with the same human cognitive capacity as the Han Dynasty engineers who developed papermaking. The delay is a delay in the diffusion of knowledge. Information moves slowly before the printing press. It moves slowly before the Silk Road trade routes are established. It moves slowly before the Mongol expansion creates a connected corridor from China to the Mediterranean in the 13th century. And then even once paper-making knowledge arrives in Europe, in Italy and Spain in the 13th century, the connection to this specific application is slow to form, because the paper that European mills produce in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries is expensive relative to the available alternatives, expensive enough that using it this way would waste a valuable material. What changes the calculation is mass production. The same industrial revolution that produces steam engines and railways, and the transformation of urban sewage treatment in the 19th century, also produces the capacity to manufacture paper in such volume and at such low cost that using it once and throwing it away becomes not just affordable but economically rational compared to the alternatives. Joseph Gaiety understood this. His 1857 medicated paper for the water closet was not a novel idea so much as it was an idea whose time had finally arrived. The idea was already in practice in China. The idea was in practice informally wherever paper was available. But the systematic commercial production of paper specifically designed for this purpose required the specific technological and economic conditions of mid-19th century America. Seth Wheeler's 1891 patent on the perforated roll added the one element that elevated it from a good product to an essential one: convenience. The perforations mean you don't need scissors or a knife or a strong grip to separate a sheet from the roll. The roll dispenser means you don't need to reach for a stack, don't need to think about how much to take, don't need to refold or store anything. The roll dispenses the product and then receives the used paper in the wastebasket, and the whole transaction is so automatic that it becomes invisible. Invisible. That's the word. That's the goal of good infrastructure design, whether it's the cloaca maxima or the perforated roll. To solve the problem so completely and so automatically that people stop noticing the problem is being solved. When you don't notice it working, it's working right. The moment you notice it, the moment the supply chain fails, the moment the shelves are empty, the moment the roll holder is empty and there's nothing within reach, is the moment you understand what the thing was doing. This happened in 2020. You may remember it. In a period of perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, across dozens of countries simultaneously, the supply of toilet paper in retail stores was disrupted by a combination of panic buying and supply chain pressure. For the first time in the living memory of most people in the affected countries, the product was not reliably available where it was expected to be. The response was informative, not because people were unprepared, most households had some supply, but because the disruption made visible for perhaps the first time for most of the affected people that the solution to this problem was not a natural feature of the universe, but a manufactured product with a supply chain that could fail. That there was a period, a very recent period historically speaking, when this solution did not exist. That people before it existed had other solutions. That those solutions were real and functional, even if they were not what we would choose. The disruption lasted weeks, not months. The supply chains restabilized. The product returned to the shelves. But for those weeks, a very large number of people thought seriously about something they had never thought seriously about before. And some of them thought about the alternatives, and some of them tried the alternatives. Water and the left hand specifically, which saw a significant spike in searches for instructions and found them more functional than expected. The Romans would not have been surprised. The Romans who used the xylospongium would have recognized the logic. When the expected solution is unavailable, the alternative that exists is the one you use. The alternative that requires only water and hand and an understanding of which hand is for what. This alternative is always available. The Japanese would not have been surprised either. The chugi, the flat wooden stick, remained in use in rural Japan well into the 19th century, not because the Japanese didn't know about paper, but because the chugi was available, disposable in the sense of being easily replaced, and effective. When the better solution is at hand, you use it. When it isn't, you use what is. The Syrians who encoded the practice into Islamic law have been not surprised at all, because the solution they developed requires nothing that can run out of stock. It requires water, which in most habitable places is available. It requires the practice, which once learned is never lost. It requires the habit, which once established is self-maintaining. The elegance of the Islamic solution is its robustness. It has no supply chain. It has no manufacturing requirement. It requires no infrastructure except water and the knowledge of what to do with it. It is less comfortable than modern paper, perhaps. Less automatic, less invisible. But it works everywhere, always, without depending on anything that can fail. This is not an argument that we should go back. We have the paper. It is wonderful. It is one of the small daily gifts of the time we live in, so automatic and so available that it has vanished from conscious awareness entirely, and that invisibility is exactly correct. But understanding what came before, what the problem looked like when the solution was different, changes how you see the solution. The Cloaca Maxima is still functional. Parts of it, the stone sections from the 6th century BC, are still in use after 2,500 years. This is, by any reasonable standard, one of the most enduring pieces of human engineering in existence. What makes it endure is not magic, and not divine favour from Venus Cloacina, though the Romans prayed to her anyway, which was sensible of them given what she was doing for their city. What makes it endure is this: it was built correctly, built to specification, built from good materials by skilled engineers who understood what they were building and why it needed to last. And then, this is the part that gets less attention, it was maintained, inspected, cleaned. The sections that failed were replaced. The infrastructure that connected to it was monitored, and when the monitoring produced evidence of failure, repaired. Gaius understood this. It's why he kept the letters and the maps and the records. Not because the records themselves fix anything, but because the records are the evidence that makes the inspection possible, that makes the repair possible, that makes the invisible essential thing keep working. You are the beneficiary of an enormous chain of people who kept the records, who kept the pipes clean, who connected the crack in the sewer wall to the illness in the street above it, and did not stop arguing until someone listened. You benefit from this every day, every morning. You benefit from it as automatically as you breathe. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, enormous. So when the lamp is out and the city is breathing around you and sleep is coming like the slow tide it always is, this is what the night contains. The accumulated work of every generation that kept the channel open. That fixed the crack. That found the better solution and made it cheap enough for everyone, and then made it invisible so that you could live your life without having to think about any of it. You don't have to think about it. But knowing it, knowing the shape of what came before, what was solved and how it was solved and by whom and over how long, this gives the ordinary morning a texture it doesn't otherwise have. The warm water from the tap, the paper on the roll, the invisible essential things, every one of them, someone's life's work, every one of them, the accumulated weight of generations of maps and records and letters and meetings and pipe repairs and people who knocked on the neighbour's door and asked what water they used. Every one of them. Gaius's 56 years and the aqueduct office's 4th meeting, and the 24 cases that didn't happen, and the 8,000 people in 3 neighbourhoods getting clean water from the Aqua Claudia extension that they don't know they're getting, that they'll use every morning without knowing it was built, partly because a physician in the Argiletum spent 4.5 years writing letters and making marks on a map. Invisible, essential. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have all the things tonight that most of the people most of the time in human history have not had. Warmth and food and safety and clean water, and the specific private invisible solution to the problem that everybody poses every day. These things are not given. They were built. They are maintained. They can fail. But tonight they are holding. Tonight the channel is open. Let that be enough. Let sleep come. Let the sounds of the city soften into the background where they live, constant and patient. The sound of the cloaca carrying what it carries, the sound of the aqueducts bringing what they bring, the sound of 1 million people being kept alive by the accumulated work of all the generations before them. Let the lamp go dark. Let the night hold the city. Let your body do what bodies do when the day is finished. Release. Release the accumulated weight of the morning's walk and the afternoon's grinding and the records and the patience and the maps and the letters. Release it into the straw mattress and the thin blanket and the particular quiet of the room at this hour when the city is at its most its own. You're here. You made it to the end of this day. You'll make it to the beginning of the next. And in between this, the dark and the quiet and the breathing and the sounds of a world that is, for all its complexity and all its failures, and all its beautiful, terrible, imperfect management of the basic conditions of human existence, still going, still going, still moving the water in and the waste out, still keeping the channel open, still, in its imperfect and incremental way, making things a little better than they were before. Sleep. The city breathes. You breathe. Good night.